Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back nearly 250 years, straight into the flickering candlelight and wood smoke haze of 1776 America. You're not a founding father signing grand documents. You're just a regular person trying to survive another Tuesday. The rooster hasn't crowed yet, but you're already awake because something bit you in the night. Your back aches from that rope bed, and somewhere in the darkness, a pig is screaming for reasons you'd rather not investigate. This is your life now. No smartphones, no running water, no ibuprofen. Just you, the cold, and the vague hope that today won't be worse than yesterday. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this era with all your teeth, and honestly, your odds of making it past 40 aren't fantastic either. But hey, at least the air is clean, when it's not filled with the smell of chamber pots being emptied out windows. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing that someone in Tokyo and someone in Toronto are both drifting off to the same strange stories about colonial chamber pots. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The darkness is absolute. That's the first thing you notice as your eyes flutter open, though open is a generous term when there's literally nothing to see. No streetlights bleeding through curtains, no digital clock casting its blue glow, no neighbour's porch light or passing car headlights sweeping across your ceiling. Just darkness so complete, it feels like a physical weight pressing against your eyeballs. You blink a few times and it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. Somewhere nearby, close enough to be alarming, something rustles. Could be a mouse, could be a rat, could be one of the children shifting in their sleep. Because yes, you're sharing this room with multiple other human beings, and the concept of personal sleeping space is about as foreign as the concept of daily bathing. You lie still for a moment, listening to the symphony of nighttime sounds, the wheeze of your father's breathing from the bed across the room, the soft snoring of your younger siblings tucked three to a mattress, the creak and groan of the house settling around you like an arthritic old man trying to get comfortable. The air is cold, not turn up the thermostat cold, but genuinely, penetratingly frigid, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and sets up permanent residence. It's late autumn, let's say, and the fire that was roaring when everyone went to sleep has dwindled to embers. Nobody got up to feed it in the night because nobody wanted to leave the marginal warmth of their blankets to stumble around in the pitch blackness, potentially stepping on a sibling or a cat or worse. So now the temperature inside your home is barely distinguishable from the temperature outside, and your breath would be visible if there were any light to see it by. You know you need to get up. The internal clock that governs colonial life, a clock wound by necessity rather than numbers on a screen, tells you that dawn is approaching. Not that you can see any evidence of this. The single window in the room, if your family is fortunate enough to have glass rather than oiled paper or wooden shutters, reveals nothing but the same impenetrable blackness. But your body knows. After years of rising before the sun, your body simply knows. Getting out of bed requires courage. The blankets, wool probably, scratchy and heavy and possibly shared with creatures you'd rather not think about, have trapped whatever body heat you've managed to generate during the night. The moment you push them aside, that heat will escape like a prisoner making a break for freedom, and you'll be left with nothing but your linen shift and the cruel embrace of the morning air. You steel yourself. You count to 3. You throw back the covers. The cold hits you like a physical blow. You suck in a breath and immediately regret it because the air tastes like wood smoke, and something vaguely animal, and the particular staleness of a room where multiple people have been breathing and existing for hours without ventilation. Your bare feet hit the floor, wooden planks if you're lucky, packed dirt if you're not, and you bite back a yelp because the floor is somehow even colder than the air, a special kind of cold that shoots up through your soles and directly into your spine. You stand there for a moment, swaying slightly, waiting for your body to accept this new reality. The darkness is starting to thin almost imperceptibly, or maybe your eyes are finally adjusting, because you can just barely make out the shapes of furniture now. The hulking mass of the chest where clothes are stored, the ghostly outline of the other bed, the glint of something metal that might be the fire poker, or might be a cooking pot left out from last night. You navigate by memory as much as by sight, shuffling forward with your hands outstretched like a very cold, very tired zombie. Your first task of the day is the fire. Everything depends on the fire. Without it, there's no warmth, no light, no cooked food, No hot water for the approximately 1/3 of a bath you might take this week. The fireplace is the beating heart of the colonial home, and right now that heart is barely flickering. You crouch before it, feeling the faint warmth of the embers on your face, and begin the delicate process of resurrection. You blow gently on the coals, not too hard or you'll scatter ash everywhere, not too soft or nothing will happen. Historians still argue whether colonial Americans had specific techniques for fire starting passed down through families, or whether everyone just sort of figured it out through trial and error and occasional singed eyebrows. What we do know is that maintaining a fire was so important that many households never let it go out entirely, keeping coals alive through the night like some kind of primitive eternal flame. You add kindling, small sticks, wood shavings, maybe some dried corn husks if you have them. The smoke makes your eyes water and your throat tickle, but you keep blowing, keep coaxing, until finally a tiny flame licks up from the embers. There it is, life, warmth, hope. You add larger sticks, then a small log, building the fire back up to something respectable. The growing light pushes back the darkness, and suddenly you can see more than shadows. The rough-hewn beams of the ceiling, the iron pots hanging by the hearth, the sleeping forms of your family members who have not yet stirred. The rooster crows. Of course there's a rooster. There's always a rooster, because this is 1776 and alarm clocks won't be invented for another 75 years, and even when they are, they won't be remotely affordable for regular people. The rooster is nature's alarm clock, and like all alarm clocks, it goes off at the worst possible moment with the most annoying possible sound. Somewhere outside, the bird announces the approaching dawn with all the subtlety of a car alarm, and around you, the rest of the household begins to stir. Your mother is up first, because your mother is always up first. Historians estimate that colonial women slept less than anyone else in the household, rising earlier and retiring later because the list of tasks that fell to them was simply endless. She appears beside you at the fire, already pulling her hair back, already calculating the day's work in her head. She doesn't say good morning because that's not really how this works. There's no time for pleasantries when there's water to be hauled and bread to be started and animals to be fed. The world outside is beginning to lighten, shifting from black to deep grey to something that might eventually become colours. Through the window, you can see the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would be beautiful if you weren't so tired and cold and hungry. But you don't have time to appreciate the sunrise. You never have time to appreciate the sunrise. The sunrise is just a signal that the workday has officially begun, and the workday in 1776, America doesn't end until the sun goes down, and sometimes not even then. You pull on additional layers over your shift. A petticoat if you're a woman, breeches if you're a man, stockings for everyone because bare legs in this weather would be actual insanity. The clothes are cold too, of course, because everything is cold, but they'll warm up eventually. Probably. The wool is scratchy against your skin, a sensation you've never really gotten used to even though you've been wearing wool your entire life. Cotton exists, sure, but it's expensive, and linen is what you sleep in, and so wool it is. Itchy, practical, endlessly wool. You're awake now, fully and completely whether you like it or not. The fire is burning properly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The household is stirring to life around you. Outside, the rooster is still going, now joined by other farm sounds. The low mooing of cattle wanting to be milked, the hopeful clucking of chickens expecting feed, the general commotion of animals who don't understand the concept of sleeping in. The day has begun, and there's no snooze button, no 5 more minutes, no scrolling through your phone while you pretend you're about to get up. Welcome to morning in 1776 America. And here's a fun fact to start your day. The average colonial American slept in 2 distinct chunks, with a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night that was considered completely normal. They called it first sleep and second sleep. And during that wakeful period, people might pray, chat with their bedfellows, or even visit neighbours. So if you've ever woken up at 3 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep, congratulations, you're accidentally historical. The darkness may have lifted, but the hard part of the day hasn't even started yet. Let's talk about that bed you just escaped from, because it deserves special attention, mostly because it's probably responsible for at least half of your daily aches and pains, and also because you're going to crawl right back into it in about 16 hours, so you might as well understand what you're dealing with. First, the frame. If your family has any means at all, your bed frame is made of wood, sturdy, hand-hewn timber that was probably constructed by someone in your family or community. because furniture stores aren't a thing and IKEA is several centuries and a Swedish revolution away. The frame holds up a system of ropes that crisscross to form a support surface, and this is where things get interesting, by which I mean uncomfortable. Those ropes are made of hemp or some other fibrous material, and they stretch over time, sagging in the middle like a very sad hammock. You know that phrase, sleep tight? It comes from this era. You literally needed to tighten the ropes periodically using a special tool, or you'd wake up curved like a human banana with your spine screaming for mercy. On top of those ropes sits your mattress, and I'm using that term extremely loosely. What you actually have is a large fabric sack stuffed with whatever organic material was cheap and available. For most people that means straw. Just straw. Dried plant stalks poked into a bag, jabbing you in the back at random intervals throughout the night like tiny agricultural assassins. If you're slightly better off, you might have a mattress stuffed with feathers, which sounds luxurious until you realise that feathers flatten, shift, and develop lumps that somehow always end up directly beneath your hip bone. The truly wealthy might layer multiple mattresses, a straw base with a feather top, but you're a regular person in this story, so you get straw and you get to like it. The smell is something else entirely. Your mattress absorbs everything: sweat, body oils, the occasional accident from a child or an elderly relative, spilled drinks, crumbs from eating in bed. Which everyone does, because where else are you going to eat when the house has one room and that room is freezing? Over time, the straw breaks down, compacts, and develops a distinct odour that's part barnyard, part humanity, part something you can't quite identify and don't really want to. You flip the mattress when you remember, and once or twice a year you might actually replace the stuffing, dragging the old straw out to the midden heap and stuffing in fresh material. For about 2 nights it smells almost pleasant. Then the cycle begins again. Now here's the part that's going to make your skin crawl, possibly literally. You're not sleeping alone. I don't mean your family members, though yes, them too. I mean the other occupants of your mattress, the ones with 6 legs, or 8. The uninvited guests who moved in the moment your mattress was constructed, and have been throwing nightly parties ever since. Bedbugs are absolutely everywhere in 1776 America. These tiny, flat, blood-sucking insects have been humanity's bedroom companions for thousands of years, and colonial Americans just sort of accept their presence the way you might accept a leaky faucet, or a neighbour who mows their lawn at 7 a.m. on Saturdays. The bugs hide in the seams of your mattress, in the cracks of your bed frame, in the ropes themselves, emerging at night to feast on your blood while you sleep. You wake up covered in itchy red welts and you just deal with it. You scratch, you curse, you maybe try some folk remedy involving herbs or smoke or prayers, but the bedbugs remain. They always remain. Fleas are also a constant companion, especially if you share your living space with animals, which many colonial families do. Dogs, cats, pigs, chickens. Animals provide food, labour and companionship, but they also provide fleas, which are more than happy to snack on humans when their preferred hosts aren't available. The fleas jump from creature to creature with enthusiastic abandon, turning your bed into a sort of parasitic timeshare. And then there are lice. Head lice, body lice. Take your pick or don't, because you're probably getting both. Lice thrive in the conditions of colonial life: infrequent bathing, shared bedding, close quarters, unwashed clothing worn for days or weeks at a time. Everyone has them. Kings have them. Paupers have them. Your minister has them. The pretty girl you've been admiring at church has them. Lice are the great equalizer of the 18th century. Democratic little parasites that don't care about your social station or your personal hygiene aspirations. The coverlets you pull over yourself, those blankets and quilts that are supposed to keep you warm, have their own ecosystems. Wool blankets, particularly, are almost never washed because washing wool is a whole production involving special soaps and careful handling and the very real risk of ruining the fabric entirely. So the blankets accumulate their own collection of microscopic inhabitants, their own scents, their own stories. Some families have blankets that have been passed down for generations, which sounds charming until you really think about how many people have sweated and drooled and scratched and existed under that same piece of fabric for 50, 70, 100 years. Sleep itself is different than you might imagine. You don't go to bed at midnight and wake up at 7. Instead, you probably go to bed shortly after darkness falls, 8 o'clock, maybe 9 in winter, because candles are expensive and there's literally nothing to do once you can't see anymore. But as I mentioned earlier, Sleep in this era is often segmented. You might sleep for 4 or 5 hours, then wake up for an hour or two, then sleep again until dawn. During that wakeful period, you might lie in the darkness and pray. You might talk with whoever is sharing your bed, and someone is almost certainly sharing your bed, because beds are valuable, and warmth is precious, and personal space is a modern luxury. Let's talk about who's in that bed with you. If you're a child, you're sleeping with your siblings. 2, 3, 4 children to a bed is completely normal. You learn early to sleep with elbows in your ribs and feet in your face and someone else's breath on the back of your neck. If you're married, you're sleeping with your spouse, obviously, but possibly also your youngest children and maybe an elderly relative who can't manage the cold alone. If you're a servant or an apprentice, you might be sleeping in a bed with other servants, or on a pallet near the fire, or in a corner on a pile of straw that doesn't even qualify as a mattress. The bed itself holds a strange position in colonial society. It's often the most valuable piece of furniture a family owns. When people write wills, they specifically bequeath their beds. To my eldest daughter, the large feather bed in the front room. This is not a throwaway line. This is a significant inheritance. A good bed represents weeks of labour, careful accumulation of materials, and the skilled craftsmanship of whoever constructed the frame. People are buried with less ceremony than beds are passed down. There's also the matter of bed curtains, which wealthier families use to create a tiny private enclosure around the bed. These curtains serve multiple purposes. They block drafts, they provide some semblance of privacy in a one-room home, and they trap your body heat inside like a textile greenhouse. Of course, they also trap everything else, the smells, the bugs, the warm exhaled breath of however many people are sleeping in there. Historians still argue whether bed curtains were primarily practical or primarily a status symbol. The answer is probably both, which is true of most things in colonial America. Getting comfortable in this bed is an art form. You've got your straw mattress that rustles every time you move, broadcasting your insomnia to the entire household. You've got blankets that are either too heavy and suffocating or not quite heavy enough to stop the cold. You've got a pillow that might be stuffed with feathers, or might be stuffed with straw, or might be a folded piece of fabric or a literal block of wood, depending on your family's circumstances and cultural background. Some colonists, influenced by medical beliefs of the time, intentionally use hard pillows because soft ones are thought to weaken the constitution. Nothing says restful sleep like resting your head on a decorative piece of lumber. The children are restless tonight, one of them coughing in that way that means everyone's going to be sick next week. Someone's feet are freezing, and they keep trying to press them against your legs for warmth. The dog has somehow snuck onto the bed again and is taking up more space than seems physically possible for an animal his size. Outside, something howls. Wolf, probably, or maybe just someone's dog who's caught a scent. The sound carries through the darkness, mixing with the creak of the house and the whisper of the wind and the soft snoring of your father, who is somehow sleeping through all of this. You shift position, and the ropes creak, and the straw rustles, and something small and many-legged scurries across your ankle before you can brush it away. This is normal. This is every night. This is what sleep means in 1776. Eventually, exhausted from the day's labour and warm enough from shared body heat to stop shivering, you'll drift off. Your sleep will be shallow by modern standards, interrupted by sounds and movements, and the general awareness that you're surrounded by other breathing beings, human and otherwise. But it's sleep, it's rest, it's the best you're going to get. And in a few hours the darkness will start to lift and the rooster will scream and you'll have to crawl out of this lumpy, scratchy, creature-infested cocoon and do the whole thing over again. Sweet dreams indeed. The fire is burning steadily now, casting its orange glow across the room, and you've been awake long enough that the initial shock of the cold has faded to a dull, constant awareness. Your body has accepted that this is simply how mornings feel. Now comes the part of the day that modern humans might call personal hygiene, though that term is doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting here. It's more accurate to call it the bare minimum required to function in society without actively offending everyone around you, and even that's generous. Let's start with your face. You might wash it this morning, you might not. It really depends on how cold the water is, how much time you have, and whether you feel like making the effort. If you do wash, you'll use water from a basin, water that someone, probably you or your mother, hauled from a well or a stream or a rain barrel before dawn. This water is cold, unheated, the temperature of the ground from which it came. Splashing it on your face is an act of minor violence against yourself, a shock to the system that probably wakes you up more effectively than the rooster. Soap might be involved, or it might not. Soap exists in 1776, but it's not the convenient bar you grab at the drugstore. Colonial soap is homemade, crafted from a deeply unpleasant combination of animal fat and lye, cooked over a fire until it reaches something resembling the right consistency. The result is a soft, brownish substance that smells vaguely of the animals it came from, and works about as well as you'd expect from something you could make in your backyard. Most families make soap once or twice a year in massive batches, storing it in barrels and using it sparingly because the process is so labour-intensive that waste feels almost sinful. Here's the thing about washing, though. You're not going to do much of it. Full-body bathing is not a regular occurrence. It might happen once a week if you're fastidious, once a month if you're busy, or almost never if you're among the many colonists who believe that bathing is actually harmful to your health. This isn't ignorance exactly. It's a different medical framework. The prevailing theory suggests that water opens the pores, allowing disease and bad air to enter the body. Keeping a layer of dirt and oil on your skin, according to this logic, provides protection against illness. The fact that bathing involves hauling enormous quantities of water, heating it over a fire, and then somehow finding privacy in a one-room home also contributes to its rarity. Taking a bath is a whole production, and most days you simply don't have the time, energy, or motivation. So your body right now is coated in a fine layer of accumulated humanity. Dead skin cells, oils, sweat both old and new, a patina of existence that builds up over days and weeks. Your hair, similarly, is not something you wash with any regularity. You might comb it, working through tangles with a wooden comb that catches and pulls and probably has a few lice riding along for the journey. You might pin it up or tie it back, but actually washing it with water and soap. That's a special occasion thing, reserved for weddings maybe, or the arrival of important visitors. Now for your teeth, and I want you to brace yourself emotionally for this part. Your teeth are in trouble. Everyone's teeth are in trouble. Dental hygiene in 1776 consists of, well, it's hard to say exactly what it consists of because it's so minimal. You might wipe your teeth with a rag. You might chew on a stick to clean between them. You might rinse with water or wine or your own urine. Yes, urine, which was genuinely believed to have cleaning and whitening properties because the ammonia content does actually have some chemical effect, however horrifying that might be to contemplate. Toothbrushes exist, technically. The first mass-produced toothbrush was designed by an Englishman named William Addis while he was in prison around 1770, and the concept was slowly spreading. But these early toothbrushes are expensive, rare, and made with bristles from pig hair or horse hair that fall out constantly and harbour their own bacterial colonies. Most people in 1776 have never seen a toothbrush, let alone used one. The consequences of this are everywhere you look. Tooth decay is rampant. Cavities don't get filled, they get endured until the pain becomes unbearable, at which point the tooth gets pulled, without anaesthesia, by someone whose qualifications might be owns a pair of pliers. Gum disease is widespread. Tooth loss is common, even among relatively young people. Walk through any colonial town and you'll see mouths with missing teeth, blackened teeth, teeth that have shifted into gaps left by their fallen comrades. The wooden teeth that legend attributes to George Washington weren't actually wood. They were a combination of human teeth, animal teeth, and ivory. But the fact that anyone needed dentures this elaborate tells you everything about the state of oral health. Breath, consequently, is not great across the board. Everyone's breath is a little questionable. Tooth decay, gum disease, and mouths that are never really cleaned create an aromatic situation that modern sensibilities would find challenging. But here's the thing, when everyone has bad breath, no one has bad breath. It's all relative. The baseline is different. You're not noticing your neighbour's oral hygiene because you're both existing in the same aromatic category. The same principle applies to body odour. Yes, you smell. Everyone smells. Humans in 1776 emit a rich bouquet of sweat, wood smoke, animal, and whatever they've been working with, leather, fish, manure, tallow. These scents layer and combine and become simply the smell of people. Perfumes and scented waters exist for those who can afford them, but they're not meant to replace bathing. They're meant to sit on top of whatever's already there, creating an olfactory combination that would send a modern perfumer into therapy. Historians still argue whether colonial Americans were truly nose-blind to these smells, or whether they were simply more tolerant of them. And the answer is probably both. You can get used to almost anything if it's constant enough. Your face wash complete, or abandoned depending on the morning, you move on to other aspects of morning preparation. If you're a man, you might shave, though not necessarily every day. Shaving is done with a straight razor, a terrifyingly sharp implement that requires steady hands and excellent lighting, neither of which you have reliably at dawn. You strap the razor on a leather strap, lather your face with soap, and very carefully scrape the blade across your skin while trying not to slice open any important arteries. Many men simply avoid this hassle by keeping beards, or by shaving only once or twice a week, or by accepting a perpetual state of stubble that would be fashionable in some future century but is merely practical in this one. Women's facial hair removal is less documented because it was considered less important, but leg and underarm hair, nobody's removing that. The smooth, hair-free body that modern Western standards idealise simply doesn't exist as a goal in 1776. Your body hair grows as nature intended, hidden beneath layers of clothing that nobody's going to remove in public anyway. What's the point of shaving your legs when your legs are covered by petticoats from ankle to waist? The chamber pot situation deserves mention here, even though we'll discuss the privy in detail later. That ceramic pot that's been sitting in the corner of the bedroom all night, receiving contributions from family members too cold or too tired to venture outside. It's full now, and it needs to be emptied. This task falls to someone, often a woman, often a child, often a servant if you have one. The pot is carried outside, its contents deposited in the privy pit, or simply tossed into the yard or the street depending on where you live and how much you care about your neighbours' opinions. The smell as you carry it is exactly what you'd expect, and you breathe through your mouth and try to think about something else. Morning hygiene complete such as it is, you're ready to face the day. You're not clean by modern standards. You won't be truly clean by modern standards until you time travel forward about 250 years, but you're clean enough. Clean enough to eat breakfast, clean enough to work, clean enough to exist alongside other people who are equally clean, which is to say equally not clean, which is to say simply human in all the messy, smelly, imperfect ways that humans have always been. The sun is fully up now, pale autumn light streaming through the window, and your stomach is making pointed observations about the fact that you've been awake for over an hour without putting anything in it. The fire needs more wood, the animals outside need feeding. The day is a long unrolling scroll of labour waiting to be completed. But first, breakfast. Whatever that means. You've washed your face, or at least acknowledged that your face exists, and now comes the part of the morning that requires actual suffering. Getting dressed. You're standing there in your shift, that basic linen garment you slept in, and you're about to pile on layers of clothing that will make you feel simultaneously overheated and underdressed, restricted, and somehow still cold in all the wrong places. Let's start with undergarments, because that's where everyone starts, and because the undergarments of 1776 deserve their own moment of recognition for being both essential and profoundly uncomfortable. If you're a woman, the shift you slept in doubles as your primary undergarment. This is a loose, long-sleeved garment made of linen, falling somewhere between your knees and your ankles depending on fashion and personal preference. It's the layer that actually touches your skin, which means it absorbs all your sweat and body oils and becomes the garment that needs washing most frequently. Most women own 2 or 3 shifts, cycling through them weekly-ish, and washing them when they become too visibly soiled or odorous to ignore. Over the shift come the stays, and here's where things get interesting, by which I mean painful. Stays are the precursor to corsets, a structured garment reinforced with strips of whalebone, wood, or sometimes metal that wraps around your torso and reshapes it into the fashionable silhouette of the era. They lift your breasts, flatten your stomach, straighten your posture, and make breathing deeply a pleasant memory from your unstructured past. You lace them up the back, which means you either need help from someone else, or you've developed the arm flexibility of a circus performer. Either way, by the time they're properly tightened, your ribcage exists in a new configuration that it did not choose and does not enjoy. Historians still argue about how tightly colonial women actually laced their stays. The extreme tight lacing that we associate with Victorian corsets was not yet fashionable, and many working women probably wore their stays looser than the ideal silhouette demanded because they needed to, move, bend, breathe, do physical labour without passing out. But even moderately laced stays are restrictive by modern standards, and you feel them with every breath, or rather every half breath. because full breadths aren't really on the menu anymore. Under the stays, some women wear a separate layer for bust support. Over the stays goes a petticoat, which is basically a skirt, then another petticoat because one is not enough apparently, then possibly a third petticoat if the weather is cold or the fashion demands extra volume. Each petticoat ties at your waist, adding weight and bulk until your lower half feels like it's wearing a small tent. The petticoats are heavy when dry and absolutely punishing when wet, and they drag on the ground, collecting mud and worse things that you try not to think about. Next comes the gown or short gown that forms your outer layer, the part that other people actually see. This might be cotton if you're fortunate, but more likely it's wool for everyday wear, warm, durable and scratchy enough to remind you constantly of its presence. The gown often opens in the front over a stomacher, a triangular piece that pins or ties into place over your stays and adds yet another layer to your increasingly mummified torso. Sleeves are tight through the arm and might be separate pieces that tie on, allowing you to wear different sleeves with different bodices, which sounds convenient until you realise it's just more ties to manage. Around your neck, you might wear a kerchief or fichu for modesty and warmth, tucking it into your neckline to cover whatever your stays are pushing up and presenting. On your head, you're probably wearing a cap. Almost all women wear caps indoors and out, little gathered pieces of linen or cotton that cover the hair, keep it out of the way, and hide the fact that it hasn't been washed in weeks. Only fancy women, or extremely informal ones, go about with uncovered hair. And your feet, your poor feet. You're pulling on stockings which are hand-knit and loose, and need to be held up by garters tied around your legs. The stockings are wool, usually, and they twist and bunch and fall down at inopportune moments. Over them go your shoes, which are made of leather, have virtually no arch support, and are often interchangeable between left and right, because nobody's figured out that feet are actually different shapes yet. Blisters are a fact of life. Sore feet are a constant companion. Now let's say you're a man. Your situation is different, but not necessarily better. You slept in a long shirt that serves the same purpose as a woman's shift. It's your basic undergarment, your first layer against the skin, the thing that absorbs your daily existence and needs periodic washing. Over this goes a waistcoat, and possibly another waistcoat on top of that, because layers are how you stay warm when central heating won't be invented for another century. But first, the breeches. These knee-length pants fasten with buttons at the waist and at the knee, and getting them on is a minor engineering project. The fabric is often wool or leather, neither of which has any stretch to speak of, so you're basically shoehorning your legs into rigid tubes and hoping the buttons don't pop off mid-squat. The crotch seam hits somewhere unfortunate, and sitting down requires certain negotiations between your body and your clothing that you've been making since childhood, but have never quite mastered. Stockings go on next, pulled up to the knee to meet the breeches, held in place by garters or by the tightness of the knee buckles. Your legs from ankle to thigh are now wrapped in layers of linen and wool, and heaven help you if you need to scratch an itch anywhere in that zone because you're not getting there without a partial disrobing. Over everything goes a coat, a long heavy garment with tails in the back and buttons down the front that's supposed to keep out the cold, but mostly just adds weight and restriction. A neckcloth wraps around your throat, the precursor to neckties, folded and tied in whatever style marks your class and occupation. Shoes similar to the women's, leather, flat, lacking any understanding of how feet actually work. A hat for outdoors, because no gentleman goes about bareheaded. Tricorns are popular, those three-cornered hats that look so dashing in paintings and catch the rain in their folds in real life. Getting dressed in all these layers takes time. 15 minutes, 20, maybe more if you're fighting with laces or buttons or that one garter that always comes loose. You're not throwing on jeans and a t-shirt. You're constructing an outfit that serves as insulation, social signal, and physical constraint all at once. By the time you're fully dressed, you're already a little sweaty from the effort, and you know that you're going to stay in these clothes. All of them, every layer, until bedtime. There's no changing into something more comfortable for dinner. There's no sweatpants. There's just this increasingly warm, increasingly fragrant collection of textiles that has become part of your body until the fire goes out tonight. The clothes themselves are valuable, remember? A single garment might represent weeks of labour, spinning the thread, weaving the cloth, cutting and sewing the pieces together by hand. Most people own only a few outfits, wearing them constantly, mending them repeatedly, passing them down when they become too worn. Fashion changes slowly because clothing changes slowly. What was stylish 20 years ago is probably still in active circulation, Faded and patched, but still serviceable. Stains are a fact of life. Sweat stains, food stains, work stains. Your clothes document your existence in ways you'd rather they didn't. Washing is labour-intensive, we'll get there, so you don't wash often, and when you do, you can't always get everything out. You live with spots and discolorations and that mysterious mark on your cuff that's been there so long you've given it a name. Finally dressed, armour assembled, you take a breath. Or, as much of a breath as your stays will allow, and prepare to face the day. You're wearing approximately 15 pounds of clothing. Your mobility is compromised. Your temperature regulation is mostly in the hands of the weather and the fire. But you're decent, you're presentable, you're ready to be seen by other humans without scandal. Now you just have to survive the next 14 hours in this outfit without anything catastrophic happening. Piece of cake. Your stomach has been making its opinions known for a while now, growling and complaining as you hauled yourself out of bed, washed your face with frigid water, and stuffed yourself into enough fabric to upholster a small couch. The sun is properly up. The fire is burning. The animals have been fed, or someone is feeding them right now, because someone's always feeding them. And you, finally, get to address the matter of breakfast. Here's the thing about breakfast in 1776. It's not the most important meal of the day. That's a marketing slogan invented by cereal companies in the future, and right now, breakfast is just the first thing you shove in your face to stop the hunger long enough to work. It's fuel, pure and simple, and it's not going to be exciting. What's on the menu? Leftovers, mostly. Whatever was made for dinner last night that didn't get entirely consumed is now your morning meal. This might be porridge, corn mush, oatmeal, something grain-based and beige and texturally somewhere between paste and pudding. It was cooked yesterday in a big iron pot hung over the fire, and it's been sitting out all night in that same pot, developing a skin on top and a certain complex character that comes from existing in a warm room for 12 hours. You scrape off the skin, or eat it, depending on your personal philosophy, ladle some into a bowl, and eat it cold or barely warm because reheating takes time you don't have. Bread might appear if someone's been baking, but bread in colonial America isn't the soft, fluffy stuff you might imagine. Most colonial bread is coarse and dense, made from whatever grains are locally available. In New England, that might mean rye or wheat. In the mid-Atlantic and south, cornbread is king. Johnny cakes, hoe cakes, ash cakes, baked directly on the hearth or on a hoe blade propped up against the fire. These corn-based breads are filling and cheap, but have a texture that requires commitment to chew through. Here's a quirky detail for you. Sailors and travellers often ate something called hardtack, which was essentially bread that had been baked twice, until it achieved the consistency of a wooden board. It could last for months, possibly years, without spoiling, because nothing could live in it, including occasionally teeth. You'd soak it in water or coffee or whatever liquid was available until it became soft enough to eat without dental tragedy. This probably isn't your breakfast unless you're travelling, but it gives you a sense of how much preservation trumped palatability in this era. And now let's talk about what you're drinking, because this is where things get interesting. You're probably not drinking water. Water, in 1776, is suspicious. You can't see bacteria. You can't test for contamination. What you can see is that people who drink water from certain sources get sick and sometimes die, while people who drink fermented beverages seem to do better. The logical conclusion, which is not entirely wrong, is that water is dangerous and beer is medicine. So your morning beverage is beer. Specifically, it's probably something called small beer, which is a low-alcohol brew, maybe 2 or 3%, similar to a modern light beer but without the marketing budget. Small beer is made from the second or third runnings of a mash, meaning it's weaker and less flavourful than the strong beer that's saved for special occasions or evening consumption. But it's safe to drink. The brewing process kills most of the nasties that might be lurking in the water, and the alcohol content, though low, provides some additional antimicrobial protection. Everyone drinks small beer. Children drink small beer. Pregnant women drink small beer. Your minister, your magistrate, your maiden aunt who makes disapproving faces at everything, they're all drinking small beer at breakfast because the alternative is dysentery and death, and that really puts a damper on your morning productivity. Cider is another popular option, especially in areas with apple orchards, which is most of New England and significant chunks of everywhere else, because colonists planted apple trees with the same enthusiasm that future generations would plant strip malls. Hard cider, fermented and slightly alcoholic, is safer than water and cheaper than beer in apple-producing regions. You might drink a mug of cider with your breakfast, and another mug with your lunch, and another mug when you get home from the fields, until you realise you've consumed half a gallon of alcohol in a day, but somehow don't feel drunk because it's been spread out over 16 hours. Coffee exists in 1776, but it's not the morning staple it will become. It's expensive, it's exotic, it requires importing beans from far away and roasting them and grinding them with equipment that not everyone has. Tea is more common, at least until recently. But we're in 1776, and tea has become politically complicated. The whole business with the tea tax and the Boston Tea Party, and the general sense that drinking tea is somehow unpatriotic, has put a real damper on tea consumption among colonists who lean toward independence. This is the era when coffee starts to become more popular in America, a patriotic alternative to British tea, though the coffee of 1776 bears little resemblance to your modern morning latte. If you're drinking coffee this morning, it's been boiled in a pot over the fire, possibly with the ground still floating in it because filters aren't a common thing. The resulting beverage is bitter, murky, and about as subtle as a punch to the face. You drink it anyway because it warms you up and wakes you up and makes a political statement all at once. What's notably absent from your breakfast? Fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, basically anything fresh because it's late autumn and the growing season is over, and refrigeration exists only in the form of ice cellars that most families don't have. Your breakfast is beige and brown and various shades of preserved. It's designed to fill your stomach and keep you working until lunch, not to delight your taste buds or provide a balanced nutritional profile. Protein might appear in the form of cheese if your family keeps a cow or has trade goods to exchange for dairy products. Colonial cheese is not the mild, uniformly flavoured stuff from plastic packages. It's made locally, aged in root cellars, and has a pungent character that announces its presence from across the room. You cut a wedge, eat it with your bread or porridge, and try not to think too hard about the conditions under which it was produced. Meat at breakfast is less common for everyday people. Meat is precious, and you save it for dinner when you can sit down properly and appreciate it. But if there's salt pork or bacon left from previous meals, it might appear on your morning table, cold and greasy and salty enough to make your lips pucker. Salt pork is everywhere in colonial cooking. Preserved with so much salt that it's essentially pickled, it needs to be soaked and rinsed before cooking to avoid turning every dish into a sodium bomb. The family gathers around to eat, or more accurately, the family grabs what it can while continuing to work. Sitting down for a leisurely breakfast isn't really a colonial concept. You eat standing by the fire, or sitting on a stool while mending something, or walking toward the barn with a hunk of bread in one hand and a bucket in the other. Meals are interruptions in work, not the centerpiece of the day. Historians still argue about exactly how many meals colonial Americans ate per day. Some evidence suggests 2 substantial meals, a mid-morning breakfast and an afternoon dinner, with maybe a small supper in the evening. Other evidence points to 3 meals similar to our modern pattern but smaller and simpler. What everyone agrees on is that food was fuel, not entertainment. You ate to live, you ate to work. The idea of eating for pleasure, of savouring flavours, of treating meals as social occasions, that existed for the wealthy certainly, but for regular people, eating was just another task on the endless list. Your breakfast is finished now. The bowl is empty, the mug is drained, the edge has been taken off your hunger at least temporarily. The sun has fully risen, flooding the world with pale autumn light, and outside the day's work is waiting with a patience that feels almost menacing. Time to face it. Time to work. Time to earn tonight's dinner, which will probably look a lot like this morning's breakfast. 1 meal down, an unknown number to go. There's no way around this. We need to talk about the privy. I've been avoiding it. You've probably been dreading it. But the reality of bathroom situations in 1776 is so central to daily life and so profoundly different from anything you know that we have to go there. Literally, you need to relieve yourself. This is a biological fact of existence, occurring multiple times daily regardless of century, and in 1776 this simple need sends you on a journey that modern sensibilities would classify somewhere between unpleasant and genuinely traumatizing. First, let's establish what a privy actually is. Imagine a small wooden shed, really small, barely big enough for one person to stand in, and often without a door, just a burlap curtain or nothing at all. Inside this shed is a bench or shelf, about waist height, with a hole cut in the top. That hole leads to a pit below, which is exactly what you think it is. A repository for human waste, dug into the ground, unlined and subject to all the geological realities of your particular location. You approach the privy. It's outside, of course, sometimes quite a distance from the house, because nobody wants that smell drifting through their windows. The walk to the privy is its own adventure. In summer, the path is hot and dusty, and insects swarm around your destination with enthusiasm that would be impressive if it weren't so horrifying. In winter, which is your current reality, the path is frozen, possibly covered in snow, and the wind cuts through whatever layers you're wearing as if they weren't there at all. You reach the privy, you pull aside the curtain or push open the crude door, and the smell hits you. There's no way to sugarcoat this. What you're smelling is human waste in various states of decomposition, mixed with whatever other organic matter has found its way into the pit, all of it producing a miasma that would make a modern sewage worker wince. You breathe through your mouth, everyone breathes through their mouth at the privy, and you try to be quick about this. The seat, if there is one, is wood. In winter, this wood is cold. Not chilly cold, not brisk cold, but cold in a way that makes contact with your bare skin feel like a personal attack. There's no warming it up first. There's no heated toilet seat. There's just you and the frozen wood and the yawning pit below, and the desperate hope that this will be over quickly. Here's something that might not have occurred to you. Toilet paper doesn't exist. Not as a commercial product, not as a household staple, not as anything you'd recognise. The first perforated toilet paper on a roll won't be invented until 1891, and in the meantime, colonial Americans are improvising with whatever's available. What's available varies by season, region, and economic status. Corn cobs are popular in agricultural areas, dried obviously because wet corn cobs would be a whole different problem. You scrape with the cob, which sounds exactly as uncomfortable as it is, and then use a second cob, sometimes dipped in water, to tidy up. Leaves serve a similar purpose when they're available, though experienced privy users learn quickly which leaves to avoid. Moss is prized for its softness if you can find it. Old fabric scraps, newsprint, pages from almanacs, anything absorbent and disposable might end up in the privy for this purpose. The wealthy sometimes use actual cloth, which is then laundered by servants who probably didn't sign up for this particular aspect of the job. These cloths are kept in a bucket and washed periodically, reused until they fall apart. This sounds gross to modern ears, but consider, modern cloth diapers work on the same principle, and at least the colonial version is usually for adults who can position things appropriately. Business concluded, you escape the privy as quickly as possible, emerging into the fresh air with something resembling relief. But wait, what about hand washing? There's a bucket nearby maybe, with water that may or may not be clean. There's no soap dispenser obviously. You might rinse your hands, swishing them around, in water that everyone else has also swished their hands in. You might wipe them on your clothes. You might do nothing at all because germ theory hasn't been invented yet and the connection between hand hygiene and disease is centuries from being understood. The privy pit, by the way, needs to be dealt with periodically. When it fills up, and it will fill up, you have options. You can dig a new pit and move the privy structure over it, abandoning the old hole to become an archaeological treasure trove for future researchers. Historians have learned enormous amounts about colonial life from excavating old privy pits, which preserve artefacts and organic matter remarkably well. One person's abandoned latrine is another person's research goldmine. Or you can hire someone to empty the pit, usually at night when the smell is less offensive to neighbours. These workers are called night soil men, and their job is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. What about night time? The privy is outside, remember, and the night is dark and cold and potentially populated by animals that are more active after sunset. This is where the chamber pot earns its keep. Instead of trudging to the privy at midnight, you use the ceramic vessel that's stationed in the bedroom, or the corner of the main room, if your house doesn't have separate bedrooms, and deal with the contents in the morning. Using a chamber pot has its own challenges. You're squatting over a relatively small opening in near total darkness, trying not to make noise that wakes the household, trying not to miss and create a clean-up situation, trying not to knock the pot over when you're done. The pot sits there until morning, contributing its presence to the overall aromatic profile of the room, and then someone empties it by tossing the contents outside into the privy pit, or occasionally out a window onto whatever unfortunate soul happens to be passing below. Urban areas have their own complications. If you live in a city like Philadelphia or Boston or New York, you might not have a privy at all, or you might share one with multiple families, which is its own special experience. The streets of colonial cities have gutters running down the centre, specifically designed to carry away waste and rainwater, but designed is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The gutters are often clogged, overflowing, or simply inadequate for the volume of material being deposited in them. Walking down a colonial street requires careful attention to where you're stepping, and the smell of a colonial city on a hot day would be memorable in all the worst ways. Historians still argue about how much colonial Americans actually suffered from the smell, or whether they were so accustomed to it that they genuinely didn't notice. The evidence suggests a bit of both. Certain smells were considered particularly bad and worth avoiding, while others were just the background aroma of existence. Prosperous neighbourhoods sometimes tried to maintain cleaner streets, and real estate near tanneries or slaughterhouses was priced accordingly. But the complete absence of sewage systems, the presence of animals everywhere, and the limitations of waste management meant that a certain baseline level of stink was simply inescapable. Your privy visit is complete now. You've experienced colonial sanitation in all its glory. You've emerged into the cold air with your dignity roughly intact and your hands questionably clean. The morning continues, the day's work beckons, and somewhere in the back of your mind you're already dreading the next time nature calls. This, by the way, is why constipation was considered a significant health concern and various regularity remedies were popular among colonists. The less often you had to visit the privy, the better. Prunes, fibre, herbal teas, anything that kept things moving efficiently was prized because the experience of actually going was so consistently unpleasant. Modern plumbing, when it arrives, will be celebrated as one of the greatest advances in human comfort and public health. But that's over a century away. For now, there's just you, the privy, and the corn cob. What a time to be alive. The privy ordeal behind you, you return to the house. The fire is burning steadily now, someone has fed the animals, breakfast has been eaten or is being eaten, and the daily routine is establishing itself in that relentless way that colonial routines do. This is your home, this is where you live. Let's take a proper look at it. First, let's manage expectations. The house in your imagination, if it involves multiple rooms, separate spaces for cooking and sleeping and socializing, probably bears little resemblance to where you actually live. Most colonial Americans, particularly those who aren't wealthy, live in homes that are breathtakingly small by modern standards. We're talking one room, maybe two if the family has some resources, a main living space where cooking, eating, working and socializing all happen, and perhaps a sleeping loft above or a lean-to addition on the side. The walls are made of whatever materials were locally available and affordable. In some areas, that means logs, actual tree trunks stacked horizontally and chinked with mud and straw to fill the gaps. In other areas, it's wooden planks, or stone if you're in a rocky region, or even sod if you're on the frontier where trees are scarce. The walls are not insulated. Whatever temperature it is outside, it's roughly that temperature inside, modified slightly by the fire and by the body heat of everyone and everything in the space. The floor beneath your feet might be packed dirt, literally earth, compressed by years of foot traffic until it's hard and smooth and constantly shedding dust. Wealthier families have wooden floors, planks laid across joists, which are a significant improvement in terms of cleanliness, but still cold and drafty. There's no carpet. There might be a woven rug near the fire, but it's there for sitting on during evening activities, not for insulation. Windows are a luxury, and they're nothing like the expansive glass panels of modern homes. Glass is expensive, hard to transport, and frequently unavailable. Many colonial windows are simply holes in the wall, covered with wooden shutters that you close against weather and open for light and air. If you do have glass, it comes in small panes, 4 inches by 6 inches maybe, held together with lead strips in a grid pattern. The glass is often wavy or bubbled, distorting the view, and it provides minimal insulation. Staring through a colonial window is like trying to see through a shower door, and the cold seeps right through. Now imagine this single room with everything in it. The fireplace dominates one wall, the heart of the home, the source of heat and light and cooked food. Near the fireplace are cooking implements, iron pots and kettles, long-handled spoons and ladles, trivets to hold pots above the flames, a crane that swings in and out to position vessels over the fire. The smell of wood smoke permeates everything, because the chimney, if there is one, doesn't draw perfectly and some smoke always escapes into the room. A table occupies whatever floor space is available, a rough wooden surface where food is prepared and eaten, where household tasks are performed, where children do what passes for schoolwork. Benches rather than chairs usually, because chairs are more expensive and take up more space. A chest for storing clothes and linens, since closets haven't been invented and wardrobes are for wealthy people. A shelf or two for dishes and foodstuffs. The bed or beds tucked against a wall or curtained off for the illusion of privacy. Everything is close together. You can stand in the centre of the room and nearly touch every piece of furniture. Privacy is a concept that colonial families have heard of but don't really experience. You sleep with other people, you eat with other people, you work, argue, cry, laugh and fight all in the same small space, constantly in each other's presence, constantly negotiating the challenges of communal living. The ceiling is low, much lower than you're used to. This is intentional. Lower ceilings mean less space to heat, and heating is the constant preoccupation of colonial life. You might be able to stand upright, but just barely, and if you're tall, you learn to duck instinctively when moving through the space. The sleeping loft, if there is one, is even more cramped. Children or servants crowded under sloping eaves where you can only stand at the centre peak. Lighting is terrible. During the day, whatever illumination makes it through those small cloudy windows provides a dim grey glow that makes detailed work difficult. At night, you rely on the fire and, if you can afford them, candles. Candles in 1776 are not the decorative items you buy at Target. They're essential household supplies that must be made or purchased at significant expense. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, are the cheap option, but they smell like cooking meat and produce a smoky, unreliable flame. Beeswax candles are better but considerably more expensive. Most families use candles sparingly, doing as much work as possible during daylight hours and going to bed when darkness makes productivity impossible. Here's something that might surprise you. Your house contains animals, not as occasional visitors, but as semi-permanent residents whose presence is considered normal and even beneficial. Chickens might wander in and out, pecking at crumbs and providing some bug control. A pig might sleep in the corner. Pigs are valuable, and keeping them inside protects them from weather and predators, while also contributing their body heat to the household warmth. The family dog isn't a pet in the modern sense. It's a working animal that happens to also live inside, eating scraps and providing security. The smell of all this, the smoke, the cooking food, the animals, the people who don't bathe regularly, the chamber pot waiting in the corner, creates an aromatic environment that would overwhelm modern nostrils. But your nose has been calibrated to this baseline since birth. You don't really smell your own house most of the time. You only notice when something new and different enters the mix. Storage is a constant challenge. Food needs to be kept somewhere safe from pests, which means barrels and boxes and ceramic crocks with heavy lids. Tools need to be accessible but not underfoot. Firewood has to be stockpiled near the hearth. In this small space, everything must have its place, and the organisational system of a colonial home would impress a modern efficiency expert. Every cubic inch is accounted for. Historians still argue about how different colonial homes were from each other across regions and economic classes. The wealthy certainly lived very differently. Multiple rooms, separate kitchens, imported furniture, glass windows, the works. But for ordinary people, the 1 or 2 room home was standard, whether you lived in Massachusetts or Virginia, and the basic challenges of heating, lighting and coexisting in close quarters were universal. Your home is also your workplace, or at least partly. Women's domestic labour happens here. The spinning, weaving, cooking, preserving, that forms the endless backbone of household economy. Children learn their letters by the fire if they learn them at all. Men might have separate workshops or barns for their trades, but the boundary between home and work is blurry in ways that modern life, with its commutes and office buildings, has largely erased. This is where you live, this small, crowded, dimly lit, smoke-filled, animal-inhabited space that contains your entire family and most of your possessions. It's home. It's the centre of your world. And in 1776, it's completely ordinary. Welcome to your colonial castle. The fire. Everything comes back to the fire. We've mentioned it already, waking to tend it, cooking by it, huddling near it for warmth. But we haven't really reckoned with how completely the fireplace dominates colonial life. This isn't a decorative element, a cosy backdrop for Christmas cards. This is survival. This is the beating heart of your household, and your entire existence revolves around keeping it alive. The fireplace in your colonial home is not the efficient enclosed stove of later eras. It's an open hearth, a large rectangular opening in the wall where fire burns on a stone or brick floor. A chimney rises above, theoretically drawing smoke up and out, though theoretically is doing heavy lifting because colonial chimneys are imperfect, and smoke escapes into the room constantly. Your eyes water, your throat scratches, your clothes, your hair, your skin, everything smells like wood smoke, a scent so pervasive that you stop noticing it until you're away from it for extended periods. The fire needs constant attention. You can't just light it and walk away. It requires feeding throughout the day, adjusting, managing. Wood is added when the flames burn low. Logs are repositioned to optimize burning. Ashes are cleared when they build up too much. Someone, usually a woman, often a child, is always watching the fire, always tending it, always alert to its needs. Letting the fire go out completely means the labour-intensive process of relighting it, which involves flint and steel and tinder and much cursing and blowing and patience. The wood consumption is staggering by modern standards. A single colonial family might burn 20 to 40 cords of wood per year, where a cord is a stack measuring 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet. That's an enormous amount of wood. Trees that must be felled, chopped, split, hauled and stacked. The labour of providing enough firewood for a household is itself nearly a full-time job, and running low on wood in winter is a genuine emergency. Cooking happens at this fire in ways that require skills modern people have completely lost. Iron pots hang from a crane, a hinged arm attached to the inside of the fireplace that can swing out over the room for loading and then swing back over the flames. The height of the pot above the fire determines the cooking temperature, and adjusting this height is how you control the heat. There's no turning a dial to 350 degrees. There's only a vague sense of hotter and cooler, and the experience of years to tell you when something's right. Roasting meat requires a different approach. A spit positioned before the fire, the meat rotating slowly to cook evenly. Someone has to turn that spit, a tedious job often assigned to children, or a mechanical device powered by weights or even a small dog on a treadmill keeps the meat spinning. Yes, really. Turnspit dogs were a specific breed, small and sturdy, trained to run on a wheel that turned the roasting spit. You might have one of these dogs in your household, earning its keep by providing perpetual motion while the beef or pork cooks. Baking is its own adventure. Some colonial homes have bake ovens built into the side of the fireplace, small chambers with their own doors that are heated by shoveling coals inside, then swept clean, then loaded with bread or pies or whatever needs baking. The retained heat in the walls does the cooking. Judging when the oven is the right temperature is an art form. You might stick your hand inside and count how many seconds you can stand it, or throw in a pinch of flour and see how fast it browns. The whole process is imprecise, variable, and produces results that range from perfect to charcoal, depending on factors you don't entirely control. The danger of fire is constant and real. Open flames in a wooden house, surrounded by flammable materials, tended by people in long, flammable garments. Fires are a leading cause of injury and death in colonial America. Women's skirts catch flame with alarming regularity. Children fall into fires. Sparks escape chimneys and land on wooden roofs. Entire towns burn down when one fire spreads out of control. Fire is necessary. Fire is life. But fire is also a predator waiting for a moment of inattention. The heat distribution in your home is wildly uneven. Right next to the fire you're warm, possibly too warm, cooking along with the dinner. A few feet away you're comfortable. Across the room you're cold again. The corners farthest from the hearth barely benefit from the fire at all. And on winter nights, water in a pitcher across the room might actually freeze while you're sweating near the flames. You learn to position yourself and your activities according to this heat gradient, moving closer or farther as needs dictate. At night, the fire is banked, covered with ashes to reduce the burn rate, leaving coals that will survive until morning without consuming all your wood. This is another skill, another judgment call. Too much ash and the fire smothers entirely. Too little and it burns through your fuel too fast. The house cools as the fire slows, and by morning, as we discussed, the interior temperature is barely distinguishable from outside. Historians still argue about exactly how warm colonial homes actually were, and the answer seems to be it varied enormously. Near the fire you might be quite comfortable. Elsewhere you might be genuinely cold for months at a time, layering on clothes and blankets and simply enduring. The modern expectation of a uniformly heated interior, maintained at a precise temperature with the twist of a thermostat, would have seemed like science fiction. The smoke is a constant presence that we should acknowledge more fully. Colonial chimneys draw imperfectly, especially when they're dirty, or when the wind is wrong, or when the fire hasn't established a proper draft. Smoke backs up into the room, creating a haze that hovers near the ceiling and descends when conditions worsen. You cook in this smoke. You eat in it. You sleep while it slowly settles on you. Respiratory issues are common. Persistent coughs, eye problems, conditions that modern medicine would trace directly to chronic smoke exposure. The fireplace is also your primary light source after dark. Candles supplement, but the main illumination comes from the fire's glow, flickering and inconstant, casting dancing shadows on the walls. You learn to position your work, your sewing, your reading if you can read, your mending, near enough to the fire to see but far enough not to singe. The fireplace becomes the gathering point for evening activities. The family draws near for warmth and light, and the fire becomes the centre of social as well as physical life. This is why, when Franklin invented his improved stove in 1742, it was revolutionary. The Franklin stove was enclosed, directing heat into the room more efficiently, while drawing smoke up the chimney more reliably. But even by 1776, such stoves aren't universal. They're expensive, they're not always available, and many families continue using open hearths because that's what they know and what they can afford. The fire demands your attention. It shapes your day. It determines where you sit, what you eat, how you sleep, when you wake. In many ways, caring for the fire is the most important job in the household, because without it, nothing else is possible. So the next time you casually flick on a light switch or adjust your central heating, spare a thought for your colonial counterpart, bent over the hearth, blowing on embers, feeding sticks to the flames, keeping alive the small burning miracle that means the difference between comfort and catastrophe. The fire burns, the smoke rises, the day continues, the fire is burning. Breakfast is a memory. The sun is fully up, flooding the world with cold autumn light, and now the work begins, specifically women's work, which is a category so vast and relentless that describing it feels almost futile. But we're going to try. If you're a woman in 1776 America, your day is an endless sequence of tasks that feed into each other, each one essential, none of them optional. There is no weekend. There is no vacation. There are no sick days, because the work doesn't care if you're feeling well. It simply needs to be done, and if you don't do it, no one will. Let's start with the cooking, since we've already visited the fire. Every meal that enters every mouth in your household passes through your hands first. This isn't a matter of opening packages or following recipes. It's transformation of raw materials into edible food using skills that take years to develop. You're butchering, grinding, kneading, stirring, monitoring, adjusting. You're managing multiple dishes at different stages of preparation over a fire that doesn't maintain a constant temperature. You're making bread from grain that might need grinding, vegetables from produce that needs cleaning and cutting, meat from animals that need preserving because refrigeration doesn't exist. The bread alone is a commitment. Colonial bread making is a multi-day process. Starting dough, letting it rise, punching it down, letting it rise again, shaping loaves, baking in that tricky oven we discussed, monitoring for doneness without a timer or a thermometer. You might bake once or twice a week, producing enough loaves to feed the family until the next baking day, and the bread grows staler and harder as the days pass until you're eating something that requires serious jaw strength. But cooking is only the beginning. Let's talk about textiles, because in 1776 almost every piece of fabric your family uses passes through a woman's hands at some stage. You spin thread, taking raw wool or flax fibre and twisting it into usable thread using a spinning wheel or even simpler tools. This is hypnotic, repetitive work, the wheel turning and the fibre feeding through your fingers for hours at a time. You might spin while doing other things, while supervising children, while chatting with neighbours, but you're always spinning because the thread is always needed. From thread comes cloth, and weaving is another skill in the domestic arsenal. A loom takes up significant space. Some families have them, others share with neighbours, or purchase cloth from those who weave commercially. But even if you're not weaving yourself, you're involved in the processes that surround it, preparing fibre, dyeing yarn, setting up the loom, finishing the cloth after it's woven. Then the sewing begins. Every garment, every sheet, every napkin and handkerchief is sewn by hand. There are no sewing machines. There's only a needle and thread, and your own fingers, creating stitches one at a time. Making a single shirt might take 12 to 14 hours of sewing, and a family needs many shirts, many shifts, many petticoats and breeches and stockings, the sewing is never done. When you're not making new things, you're mending old ones, patching holes, reinforcing seams, extending the life of garments that cost so much labour to create. Laundry is an ordeal that happens once a week if you're diligent, less often if you're overwhelmed. First, you haul water, lots of water, heavy bucket after heavy bucket from the well or stream to the house. Then you heat it, filling large tubs or kettles. Then the washing begins, soaking, scrubbing, wringing, scrubbing more. Soap is involved, that homemade lye soap that strips the oils from your hands as effectively as it strips the dirt from fabric. You rub and twist and pound, working out stains that are weeks old and thoroughly set. The wringing is brutal on your hands, your wrists, your arms. You're twisting heavy wet fabric as hard as you can, squeezing out water so the things will actually dry before mildew sets in. Then hanging everything to dry, on lines, on bushes, on fences, wherever there's space and sun. Then ironing if you have irons, heavy metal implements heated in the fire, lifted with thick cloths to protect your hands, pressed against fabric to smooth wrinkles before they cool and need reheating. Historians estimate that laundry alone consumed an entire day of a colonial woman's week. One full day, every week, just washing clothes. And that's assuming nothing goes wrong, assuming you have enough water and soap, assuming the weather cooperates and things actually dry. Let's talk about soap making, since we keep mentioning that homemade soap. Once or twice a year you collect animal fat, drippings from cooking, scraps from butchering, and render it down to clean tallow. You make lye by dripping water through wood ashes, creating a caustic alkaline solution that can burn your skin on contact. Then you combine the fat and lye, cooking the mixture for hours over the fire, stirring and watching until it reaches the right consistency. The result is soft soap, which you store in barrels and use sparingly throughout the year. The process is dangerous, that lye again, smelly, rendering fat is not pleasant, and time-consuming, but without it there's no soap. Candle making is similar, another periodic production that requires collected materials and significant labour. You save tallow or beeswax, melt it down, dip wicks repeatedly until candles build up layer by layer. Each candle represents dozens of dips, each dip carefully controlled to build thickness without dripping or warping. The candles you make will provide light through the winter months, so you need a lot of them. Food preservation is a constant background task. Smoking meat, salting fish, pickling vegetables, drying fruit, making preserves. Summer and autumn are for putting up food that will sustain the family through winter, and the work is urgent because what you don't preserve now, you won't have later. Women manage this process, deciding what to preserve and how, monitoring stores, rationing supplies as the months pass. Child rearing happens simultaneously with all of this, not as a separate activity but woven throughout every task. Children are nursed while spinning, supervised while cooking, taught while sewing. There's no daycare, no school for most children. Their education happens at home, from parents who are also working constantly. You teach daughters to spin and sew and cook. You prepare sons for apprenticeships or farm work. The teaching is hands-on, practical, integrated into the daily labour. Medical care, such as it is, falls to women as well. You're the one who treats illness and injury with whatever herbs and remedies you know, who nurses the sick through fevers, who sits up at night with a coughing child. Childbirth, we'll cover this more later, is attended by women, usually midwives or experienced neighbours, but the pregnant woman's family is involved throughout. Historians still argue about whether colonial women had more or less leisure than their male counterparts. The work was certainly different, more varied, more homebound, more interruptible by the needs of children. But was it less demanding? The evidence suggests not. Women's work was simply endless, a series of tasks that flowed into each other without clear beginning or end, filling every available hour from waking to sleeping. And here's the thing. Most of this work is invisible in the historical record. It didn't generate documents or leave physical traces. It just happened day after day, century after century, keeping families fed and clothed and functional. The sun is climbing toward noon. There's flour on your hands and a spinning wheel waiting, and laundry that won't do itself, and a fire that needs feeding, and children that need minding, and 1,000 other tasks that need attention. The work never ends. The work never ends. If you're a man in 1776 America, your work takes a different shape, usually outside the home, usually involving muscles and tools and weather that doesn't care about your comfort. The gender divide in colonial labour isn't absolute. but it's pronounced, and while women manage the household and its endless demands, men are expected to manage everything else: the fields, the shop, the trade, the heavy lifting of economic survival. For most men, that means farming. Agriculture employs the vast majority of colonial Americans, and farming in this era is nothing like the mechanized operation you might imagine. There are no tractors. There are no combine harvesters. There's you, maybe a plough horse or an ox if you're fortunate, and tools that would be recognizable to a medieval peasant, because they haven't changed much in centuries. You plough by walking behind a wooden plough, guiding it through soil that fights back, roots and rocks and clay conspiring to make every furrow a battle. The plough is pulled by an animal, a horse, an ox, maybe two, and you control both the animal and the implement, adjusting depth and direction while also not getting trampled or run over. A single acre might take a full day to plough, and you have many acres, and ploughing is only the beginning. Planting follows, walking the fields with a sack of seed, broadcasting by hand or placing seeds individually in rows, bending and straightening thousands of times in a single day. Your back will hurt. Your back always hurts. The seeds go into the ground and then you wait, watching the sky, praying for rain but not too much rain, warmth but not drought. All the factors you can't control that will determine whether your family eats this year. Weeding is relentless, because weeds don't observe holidays or Sundays. You walk the rows with a hoe, chopping at unwanted growth, trying to stay ahead of the plants that would strangle your crops if you let them. Insects arrive, eating your work. Disease strikes, killing plants overnight. The war against nature is constant and only occasionally winnable. Harvest is the climax. Weeks of brutal labour gathering what you've grown before weather or pests can destroy it. You cut grain with a scythe, swinging the curved blade in rhythmic arcs that build blisters and strengthen muscles you didn't know you had. You bind the sheaves, stack them, thresh them to separate grain from straw. The work begins at first light and ends at last light, and there's no time to rest because every day you don't harvest is a day the weather might turn and ruin everything. If you're not a farmer, you're probably a tradesman, and the trades of colonial America are varied and essential. Blacksmiths hammer iron into tools and horseshoes and hardware, working over forge fires that make the hearth at home seem cosy by comparison. The physical demands are immense, swinging hammers for hours, manipulating metal at temperatures that can cause serious burns with a moment's inattention. A blacksmith's arms are legendary, and so is his thirst. The heat drives you to drink constantly, usually beer or cider, which is safer than water and replaces some of the fluid you're sweating away. Carpenters build and repair the wooden structures that constitute most of colonial construction. This means sawing by hand. No power tools, no electricity, just a two-man saw ripping through timber hour after hour. It means chiseling joints with precision that modern power tools have made obsolete but colonial craftsmen achieved through skill and patience. It means climbing and lifting and carrying, navigating construction sites that would make a modern safety inspector weep. Coopers make barrels, which are essential for storing and transporting everything from ale to apples. Tanners process animal hides into leather, working with chemicals that smell so terrible that tanneries are typically located downwind of everything else. Millers grind grain into flour, managing the dangerous machinery of their mills, water-powered or wind-powered, with grinding stones that can catch fingers or clothing and cause horrific injuries. Each trade has its hazards, its physical demands, its toll on the body. Smiths develop respiratory problems from breathing forge fumes. Carpenters' bodies wear out from constant heavy lifting. Workers in various industries develop conditions specific to their exposure: lung diseases, skin problems, repetitive strain injuries that we now have names for but colonial medicine could only endure. The workday is long, 12 hours in winter, 14 or 16 in summer, from first usable light to last. There's no 40-hour work week, no overtime pay, no workers' compensation when you're injured on the job. You work until the work is done or until darkness makes working impossible, whichever comes first. Apprenticeship is how young men learn trades, and it's a system that shapes lives from age 10 or 12 well into the 20s. You're bound to a master craftsman living in his house, learning his trade, working essentially without pay for 7 years or more. In exchange, you gain skills that will eventually allow you to support yourself. But in the meantime, you're cheap labour, doing the dirtiest and most tedious tasks while gradually earning the trust to handle more complex work. Indentured servants occupy a different position, adults who have sold their labour for a fixed term, usually 4 to 7 years, in exchange for passage to America, room and board, and perhaps some payment at the end of their service. They're not slaves, their servitude has a defined endpoint, but during their term of service they have limited rights and significant obligations. Many immigrants come to the colonies this way, working off their debt through years of labour before gaining their freedom. The lines between categories blur and shift. A farmer might also be a part-time carpenter, a smith might farm a few acres, a merchant might participate in various trades depending on what's needed and what's profitable. The modern specialisation of careers isn't fully developed yet. People are more likely to have varied skills that they apply as circumstances require. Historians still argue about whether colonial men or women worked harder, and the argument is probably unanswerable. The types of labour are so different: outdoor versus indoor, seasonal versus constant, physical versus diverse. That comparison is difficult. What's clear is that neither gender had an easy time of it. Survival required the constant labour of everyone in the household, children included. The sun is past its peak now, sliding toward afternoon. Your muscles ache from this morning's labour and there's more waiting. Tools to sharpen, fences to mend, animals to manage, preparations for tomorrow that can't wait. The work doesn't stop because you're tired. The work doesn't stop at all. Speaking of labour that never stops, let's turn our attention to the smallest members of colonial households, the children. And let's immediately dispel any notions of childhood as a protected, carefree time of play and learning. In 1776 America, childhood is short, work begins early, and the line between child and adult is measured in responsibility rather than years. From the moment a child can follow simple instructions, around age 3 or 4, they have tasks, not chores in the modern sense, optional activities that earn allowance and build character. Tasks. Essential contributions to household function that must be completed because the household depends on them. A young child might be responsible for gathering eggs, a job that sounds simple until you remember that chickens aren't always cooperative, that eggs are fragile, that the chicken coop is dark and probably houses more than just chickens, mice, spiders, the occasional snake seeking warmth. A 4-year-old navigating this environment every morning, collecting eggs in a basket, learning not to drop them, learning to move carefully around territorial hens. This is normal, this is expected. This is training for a life of constant labour. Older children, 6, 7, 8, take on more substantial work. Boys might be helping in the fields, handling animals, fetching and carrying for fathers or older brothers engaged in trade. They learn through doing, acquiring skills by imitation and repetition, being corrected when they make mistakes in ways that range from gentle instruction to physical punishment depending on the gravity of the error and the temperament of the teacher. Girls are apprenticed to domestic work with similar intensity. A 7-year-old might be responsible for younger siblings, entertaining and supervising them while her mother works. She's learning to spin, to knit, to cook simple dishes under supervision. She's fetching water, feeding animals, helping with laundry. The skills she's acquiring are the same skills she'll use as a wife and mother, and the training begins early because the expectations are high. Here's something that often surprises modern observers. Formal education is rare and unevenly distributed. There are no public schools in 1776, at least not in any form we'd recognise. Education, when it happens at home. Mothers teaching reading, fathers teaching trade skills, perhaps a literate community member offering instruction to neighbourhood children. A child who can read, write, and do basic arithmetic is educated by colonial standards. And many children don't achieve even this level. For boys who will enter professions requiring more learning, ministers, lawyers, physicians, there are grammar schools and eventually colleges, but these are for the elite, for families with resources and ambitions that extend beyond farming and trades. Most boys learn what they need for the life they'll actually live. Enough literacy to read a Bible, enough numbers to handle basic commerce, enough practical skill to work alongside their fathers and eventually take over or establish their own households. Girls receive even less formal education on average. The assumption is that women don't need learning beyond what's required for household management. Some girls from wealthy families might learn French, music, and other accomplishments that signal refinement, but this is decoration rather than education, designed to make them more attractive marriage partners, rather than more capable individuals. Most girls learn from their mothers, domestic skills, practical knowledge, the wisdom needed to run a household and raise children. Play exists. Children are still children, and they find ways to play even in the midst of labour, but it's squeezed into margins. Games happen during brief rest periods on Sunday afternoons, in the moments between tasks when supervision is light. Children make toys from available materials, dolls from corn husks, balls from rags, hoops from barrel staves. They play versions of games that will survive centuries. Tag, hide and seek, various ball games whose rules vary by region and tradition. Discipline is strict by modern standards, which is a polite way of saying that physical punishment is common and accepted. Spare the rod, spoil the child is not a figure of speech. It's a parenting philosophy rooted in religious beliefs about human sinfulness and the necessity of correction. Children who misbehave, who neglect their tasks, who talk back to parents or other authorities, face physical consequences: spanking, switching, slapping. The goal is obedience, and the method is pain. This doesn't mean colonial parents don't love their children. They clearly do, and personal documents are full of parental affection and grief when children die, which happens frequently. But love and discipline are not opposed in the colonial worldview. Discipline is an expression of love, a way of preparing children for a world that will not coddle them. Child mortality haunts colonial life in ways that modern parents can barely imagine. Somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of children die before reaching adulthood, taken by diseases that we now prevent or cure easily. Measles, whooping cough, dysentery, smallpox, accidents, complications from minor injuries that become major infections. Parents have many children partly because they expect to lose some. Large families are insurance against the cruelty of early death. The emotional impact of this mortality is debated by historians. Some argue that parents maintained emotional distance, protecting themselves from the grief of inevitable loss. Others argue that parents loved their children as intensely as modern parents do, and that the frequency of death made grief more common, not less painful. The truth is probably both. Parents loved fiercely and lost frequently, and their emotional lives were shaped by this combination in ways we can only partially understand. Childhood ends early. By 12 or 13, many children are essentially doing adult work. Boys apprenticed to trades or working alongside fathers, girls taking on full domestic responsibilities as junior versions of their mothers. Marriage can happen in mid-teens, especially for girls, and the transition from child to adult is measured in capability rather than age. If you can do the work, you're ready to be an adult. There is no adolescence in the modern sense, no protected period of identity formation and emotional development between childhood and adulthood. There's just childhood, which is preparation for work, and adulthood, which is the work itself. The luxury of an extended transition belongs to the wealthy, and will not become widespread for another 2 centuries. The children in your household are working now, scattered across the day's tasks. The youngest are helping in small ways, learning skills they'll need. The oldest are doing adult work, preparation for the adult lives that will arrive sooner than seems fair. Childhood in 1776 is not innocent. It's not carefree. It's a brief training period before the real labour begins. Let's talk about what happens to all that food you're growing, raising, and struggling to produce. The desperate, ongoing battle to keep it edible long enough to eat. Because in 1776, without refrigeration, without freezers, without the preservatives that make modern food last for months or years, keeping food from spoiling is one of the central challenges of existence. First, understand the enemy. Bacteria, mould, insects, rodents. All of them want your food, and all of them will take it if you're not vigilant. The moment you slaughter a pig, the clock starts ticking. The moment you harvest vegetables, decomposition begins. You're racing against biology, and biology has millions of years of evolution on its side. Salt is your primary weapon. Salt draws moisture out of food, creating an environment where bacteria struggle to survive. Salt pork, salt beef, salt fish. You're salting everything that can be salted, packing meat into barrels with layers of salt crystals, trusting the chemistry you don't understand to preserve food you desperately need. The amounts of salt involved are staggering. A single pig might require 20 or 30 pounds of salt to preserve properly, and a family trying to make it through winter needs a lot of preserved meat. Salt is valuable enough to be worth trading for, worth travelling for, worth worrying about when supplies run low. The resulting product is intensely salty. So salty that you have to soak it for hours before cooking, trying to draw out enough salt to make the meat edible without being overwhelming. Even after soaking, salt pork has a distinctive flavour and texture that modern palates find challenging. Dense, chewy, with a salt intensity that lingers long after the meal. Smoking is another preservation method, and it works beautifully if you have the setup. A smokehouse, a small enclosed building where meat can hang while smoke from a smouldering fire surrounds it, creates conditions that preserve meat for months. The smoke deposits chemicals on the meat surface that inhibit bacterial growth, while the low heat helps dry the meat to make it less hospitable to microorganisms. Building and maintaining a smokehouse takes resources though, and not every family has one. Some families smoke meat in their regular fireplaces, hanging it in the chimney where smoke passes on its way out. The results are less consistent but still effective. Ham, bacon, sausages, these are all products of smoking, methods of extending the life of meat that would otherwise spoil within days. Drying is perhaps the simplest preservation method. Remove the water, and most of the things that spoil food can't survive. Dried beans, dried corn, dried fruit. These are staples of the colonial diet, foods that can last for months or years if kept dry and protected from pests. The process is simple in theory. Spread the food in the sun, wait for it to dry, store it in a cool, dry place. In practice, you're dependent on weather. You need several days of hot, dry conditions, and you're racing against insects and animals who want to eat your drying food before you can store it. Pickling extends the reach of preservation to vegetables and other foods that don't respond well to salting or smoking. Vinegar, salt, and spices create an environment acidic enough to inhibit spoilage, and pickled vegetables can last for months in their brine. Pickled cucumbers, pickled cabbage, sauerkraut, pickled beets, colonial families pickle whatever's abundant, laying up stores of vegetables for the months when nothing fresh is growing. Root cellars help with storage, using the natural coolness of the earth to slow decomposition. A good root cellar dug into a hillside or beneath a house maintains temperatures around 50 degrees year-round, not cold enough to freeze, not warm enough to promote rapid spoiling. Root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, turnips, and parsnips store well in these conditions, lasting through winter in a state of suspended animation. Cellars also store barrels of cider, which will gradually turn to vinegar if you don't drink it first, crocks of preserves, and whatever other goods benefit from cool, dark conditions. Managing a cellar is its own skill, monitoring for rot, removing affected items before they spoil neighbours, managing humidity and ventilation to maintain optimal conditions. Pest control is constant warfare. Mice and rats will eat stored food given any opportunity. You build barriers, set traps, keep cats. Insects infest flour and grain and dried goods. You check regularly. Sift before using. Accept that some level of contamination is inevitable. Weevils in your bread, extra protein. You learn not to look too closely at what you're eating because looking closely reveals things you'd rather not know. Historians still argue about how much food colonial families actually lost to spoilage. The answer seems to be a lot, but not as much as you might expect given the primitive conditions. Colonial food preservation worked. It had to work because survival depended on it. But it worked imperfectly, and every family experienced the disappointment of discovering that the barrel of salt pork they were counting on had gone bad, or the dried apples had been eaten by something with more legs than a human. The seasonal rhythms of preservation shape the year. Late summer and fall are intense periods of putting up food, slaughtering animals, salting meat, smoking hams, drying vegetables, making preserves. The work is urgent because winter is coming, and what you don't preserve now, you won't have then. The root cellar fills, the smokehouse empties into storage, barrels of salt pork stack up against the coming cold. Spring brings the opposite anxiety, watching stores dwindle, rationing carefully, hoping you preserved enough to make it through. By late winter, the variety is gone. You're eating the same salted meat and dried vegetables every day, monotony compounded by the knowledge that fresh food is still weeks or months away. This is when scurvy sometimes appears among colonists who have no access to preserved sources of vitamin C, though it's more common among sailors than land dwellers. Your cellar right now, in this late autumn moment we're inhabiting, is filling up nicely. Barrels of apples and turnips and potatoes, crocks of sauerkraut and pickles, smoked hams hanging from beams. You've worked hard for this abundance, and you're hoping it's enough. It will have to be enough. Now that we've discussed how you preserve food, let's talk about what you're actually eating. the daily reality of colonial meals, which is simultaneously more monotonous and more varied than you might imagine. Monotonous because the same ingredients appear over and over, varied because colonial cooks found many ways to prepare those limited ingredients. The foundation of the colonial diet, especially in middle and southern colonies, is corn. Indian corn, maize, the same grain that indigenous Americans cultivated for thousands of years and taught colonists to grow. Corn is remarkably adaptable, grows well in American conditions, and forms the caloric backbone of most colonial diets. You're eating corn at almost every meal, in some form or another. Cornmeal mush, called hasty pudding, samp, or various regional names, is what it sounds like. Cornmeal boiled in water until thick, served hot with milk or molasses if you have them. This might be breakfast, it might be dinner, it might be sliced and fried the next day when it's solidified. The taste is bland but comforting, filling but not exciting. Johnny cakes, hoe cakes, corn pone. These are variations on the theme of cornmeal mixed with water and cooked on a flat surface or in the ashes. Quick, simple, and endlessly repeatable. You eat them with whatever's available, butter, gravy, beans, nothing at all. In New England, where corn yields to other grains, you might find more wheat and rye in the diet, but even there corn remains important. The famous Boston baked beans are cooked with salt pork and molasses for hours, producing something that's both a side dish and a main course depending on what else is available. Meat appears in the diet, but less frequently than you might expect. Animals are valuable, and slaughtering them means losing the future eggs, milk, or labour they'd provide. When meat does appear, it's often that salt pork we've discussed, intensely salty, dense with preserved flavour, cooked with vegetables to stretch it further. Fresh meat is seasonal, arriving mostly in late fall when animals are slaughtered before winter. That's when you might eat fresh pork, fresh beef, fresh mutton, before it's salted or smoked for preservation. These are the weeks of relative plenty when meat appears at every meal and everyone eats their fill before the long preservation process begins. Chicken and other poultry appear occasionally, but chickens are more valuable for their eggs than their meat. Eating a chicken means giving up the eggs that chicken would lay, which is a significant sacrifice. Old chickens that have stopped laying well might end up in the pot, but young productive hens are protected investments. Fish is important in coastal areas and along rivers, fresh when available, salted or dried when not. Cod especially is salted and dried into a product that keeps for months and can be reconstituted for cooking. Cod and potatoes, cod and corn, cod cakes. These are staples for families with access to fishing or trade routes. Vegetables from the garden round out the diet. Peas, beans, turnips, cabbages, squash, pumpkins. These appear fresh in their seasons and preserved throughout the rest of the year. The colonial kitchen garden is a crucial food source, and women tend these gardens carefully, coaxing vegetables from the soil to supplement the grains and meats that form the dietary core. Fruit is seasonal and often preserved as well. Apples are everywhere. Cider, apple butter, dried apples, apple pie, if you have the means for a proper crust. Berries appear in summer and are made into preserves. Pumpkins, technically a fruit, become pies and puddings. Fresh fruit is a summer luxury. The rest of the year, you rely on what's been preserved. Here's something interesting about colonial cooking. Recipes, as we understand them, barely exist. You don't follow a written recipe. You cook the way your mother taught you, the way her mother taught her, adjusting by instinct and experience. The proportions are enough. Some. Until it looks right. Temperature is controlled by feel. Timing is controlled by attention. This is cooking as craft rather than science, passed down through demonstration rather than documentation. Spices are limited by cost and availability. Salt is essential and relatively common. Pepper is expensive but widely used by those who can afford it. Cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice. These appear in wealthier households and on special occasions. Most everyday cooking relies on herbs you can grow yourself: sage, thyme, parsley. The result of all this is a diet that's heavy on carbohydrates, heavy on salt, and relatively low on fresh produce by modern standards. Nutritional deficiencies are common, though people don't understand them in those terms. Rickets affects children who don't get enough vitamin D. Scurvy appears among those who go too long without vitamin C. Goiter plagues regions with iodine-poor soil. The connection between diet and health is understood vaguely. People know that eating certain foods makes them feel better, but the science is centuries away. Meals themselves are communal events, usually eaten from shared dishes rather than individual plates. A pot of stew might be placed on the table, and everyone eats directly from it with spoons. Bread is torn by hand and used to soak up gravy. The idea of individual portions, perfectly plated, belongs to a different era entirely. You don't eat for pleasure, primarily. You eat for survival, for fuel, for the energy to get through another day of labour. The food is often bland by modern standards, underspiced, repetitive, monotonous. But it's food, it's sustenance. In a world where hunger is always possible, where bad harvest means starvation, the simple fact of having enough to eat is not taken for granted. The evening meal tonight will be similar to yesterday's, and tomorrow's will be similar to tonight's. Corn, pork, vegetables, bread. The same ingredients rearranged in slightly different configurations. You'll eat it without complaint because you're hungry, and there's nothing else. This is what eating means in 1776: monotony, sustenance, survival. Let's return to that mug of small beer we mentioned at breakfast, because drinking in colonial America deserves more attention. The quantities consumed, the centrality of alcohol to daily life, the sheer normalcy of being mildly intoxicated from morning until night, all of this would genuinely shock modern sensibilities and probably also modern livers. Here's the thing: colonists drink constantly. Not because they're alcoholics in the modern understanding of the term, but because alcohol is safer than water, more nourishing than plain fluids, and considered essential to health and productivity. The idea that alcohol might be problematic doesn't really exist yet. What exists is a culture where everyone drinks, all the time, and sobriety is vaguely suspicious. The average adult colonist consumes somewhere between 3 and 7 gallons of alcohol per year, depending on whose estimate you trust. That's roughly double what modern Americans drink, and it's distributed across every day rather than concentrated on weekends. You wake up to small beer, you drink cider with lunch, you have stronger beer or rum in the evening. This is normal. This is expected. This is what respectable people do. Small beer, remember, is low alcohol, comparable to modern light beer. It's the everyday beverage, the default choice for morning and midday when you still need to function. Children drink it. Workers drink it. Ministers drink it. The slight buzz it provides is considered beneficial, a gentle enhancement to the day's activities rather than an impediment. Cider fills a similar role in regions where apples are plentiful. Hard cider, fermented until it has an alcohol content similar to beer, is cheap, widely available, and consumed in enormous quantities. A family with an orchard might produce hundreds of gallons of cider each year, drinking some fresh and letting the rest ferment. Cider is so common in New England that it's practically water with better flavour. Stronger beverages appear for special occasions or evening consumption. Rum, imported from the Caribbean, is hugely popular, so popular that the rum trade drives significant portions of colonial commerce. Rum punch, mixing rum with water, sugar and citrus, is a fixture of social gatherings. Straight rum appears in taverns, in homes, on ships, wherever adults congregate. Whiskey is gaining ground, especially in areas where grains are plentiful. Distilling is a practical way to convert grain that might spoil into a product that lasts indefinitely. Farmers with surplus corn or rye turned it into whiskey, which becomes both a beverage and a form of currency in some areas. Wine exists, but is primarily for the wealthy, imported from Europe, expensive, a status symbol. Beer brewed from barley, as distinct from the corn-based small beer, is also available but less universal than the grain beverages that local ingredients make possible. The tavern is the social hub of colonial community life. Every town of any size has at least one tavern, and larger towns have many. These are not the seedy bars of later imagination. They're respectable establishments where businessmen conduct deals, travellers find lodging, and neighbours gather to discuss news and politics. Women sometimes attend taverns, though less frequently than men. Children might be present, especially if their families are travelling, and the tavern provides accommodations. The tavern keeper is an important figure, a kind of community information hub who knows everyone's business and facilitates connections. News arrives at the tavern. Travellers bring stories from distant places. Newspapers, where they exist, are read aloud. Rumours circulate and mutate. In the political ferment of 1776, taverns are where revolutionary sentiments are debated, where sons of liberty meet, where the coming conflict is hashed out over mugs of ale. Drunkenness does occur, of course. and it's viewed with some disapproval, but the line between pleasantly convivial and problematically drunk is drawn differently than we draw it today. A man stumbling home from the tavern might be gently criticised but isn't necessarily condemned. A man who can't work because of drinking is a different matter. Productivity is the measure, and as long as you can still do your job, your alcohol consumption is largely your own affair. Historians still argue about whether colonists were functionally alcoholic by modern standards, or whether their bodies had adapted to constant low-level consumption in ways that minimised impairment. The truth is probably that tolerance builds with practice, and people who've been drinking since childhood develop the ability to function at blood alcohol levels that would incapacitate a modern social drinker. The health effects of this consumption are mixed. On one hand, the alcohol provides calories, hydration, beer and cider are mostly water, and some nutritional content from the grains and fruits involved. On the other hand, chronic alcohol consumption takes its toll. Liver damage, cognitive effects, the various ailments we now associate with heavy drinking. But these effects are attributed to other causes: bad air, imbalanced humours, moral weakness. Because the medical understanding of alcohol's impact is centuries away. Drinking is social glue in colonial America. Transactions are sealed with drinks. Friendships are cemented over mugs. Events of all kinds, weddings, funerals, barn raisings, elections, involve alcohol in quantities that seem excessive by any standard. Not drinking would mark you as strange, possibly untrustworthy, definitely not part of the group. The temperance movement that will eventually transform American drinking culture doesn't exist yet. The idea that alcohol is inherently problematic, that abstinence is a virtue, that restricting access would benefit society, none of this has gained traction. In 1776, alcohol is simply part of life, as normal and unquestioned as eating or breathing. Your mug is empty now, and you'll refill it before the day is done, probably multiple times with different beverages as the hours pass. This is what hydration means in colonial America. A constant, gentle stream of alcohol that carries you from waking to sleeping, from task to task, through the long hours of labour and the short hours of rest. Drink up. Everyone else is. Let's say you don't feel well. Maybe your head aches, or your stomach is unsettled, or a wound has become inflamed and painful. In 2024, you'd reach for ibuprofen, or visit urgent care, or consult the internet for symptoms. In 1776, you're entering a medical system that operates on principles so different from modern medicine that calling it a system is generous. The basic framework of colonial medicine is humoral theory, an understanding of the body inherited from ancient Greece and still dominant after 2,000 years. The body contains 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And health is a matter of balance. Illness occurs when humours become imbalanced, and treatment aims to restore balance through various means. This sounds reasonable in the abstract, and it's internally consistent, but it leads to treatments that modern medicine would consider somewhere between useless and actively harmful. The most famous of these is bloodletting, the deliberate removal of blood to correct an excess of that humour. If you have a fever, for example, the logic suggests you have too much blood, and the solution is to drain some off. Bloodletting is performed by physicians, by barbers, hence the red and white barber pole symbolising blood and bandages, by surgeons, even by patients themselves in some cases. The method might be a simple incision, or the application of leeches, or a process called cupping, where heated cups create suction on the skin to draw blood to the surface. The amounts removed can be substantial, pints of blood from patients who are already weakened by illness. Does it help? Almost never. In most cases, bloodletting weakens an already weak patient, reducing their body's ability to fight infection. George Washington, a few decades from now, will die partly because his physicians drained too much blood while treating a throat infection. But the practice persists because humoral theory says it should work, and because sometimes patients recover despite the treatment, which is taken as evidence that the treatment worked. Purging is another common intervention, aimed at expelling excess humours through vomiting or violent diarrhoea. The substances used to induce purging are themselves toxic: mercury, arsenic, various plant compounds, and the process leaves patients dehydrated, exhausted, and arguably worse off than before. But again, the theory demands it, and so the practice continues. Blistering involves applying irritating substances to the skin to raise blisters, supposedly drawing bad humours out of the body. This is exactly as pleasant as it sounds, and equally effective, which is to say not at all. Surgery exists, but it's brutal by any standard. There's no anaesthesia beyond alcohol or opium, which dull sensation but don't eliminate it. There's no understanding of germs or sterile technique. Surgeons operate with dirty hands, using instruments that have been used on countless previous patients without proper cleaning. The surgical theatre, if that term even applies to colonial surgery, is a place of screaming, restraint, and speed, because the faster the operation, the less suffering for the patient, and the better the odds of survival. Amputations are the most common major surgery, performed when limbs are too damaged to save, from accidents, infections, or warfare. The patient is held down, given what painkillers are available, and then the surgeon saws through flesh and bone as quickly as possible. The stump is cauterized, often with hot tar, and the patient is left to hope that infection doesn't set in. Many patients survive, many don't. The ones who survive often face chronic pain and disability for the rest of their lives. Childbirth, as we'll discuss more fully, is attended by midwives rather than physicians, which is probably for the best given what physicians would bring to the process. Obstetric intervention when it occurs, forceps, manual extraction, carries enormous risks and is reserved for cases where mother and child would both die otherwise. Here's the quirky fact for this section. Many colonists prefer home remedies and folk medicine to professional medical treatment, and they're often right to do so. Herbal remedies passed down through generations sometimes actually work. Willow bark tea, for example, contains the compound we now call aspirin, and it genuinely reduces fever and pain. Other folk remedies are useless but at least not harmful, which puts them ahead of bloodletting in terms of outcomes. Women maintain and transmit much of this practical medical knowledge, treating minor illnesses and injuries at home with remedies they learned from their mothers. Every household has its collection of dried herbs, its recipe for fever tea, its poultice for wounds. This parallel medical tradition, running alongside professional medicine, probably saves more lives than it costs. Dentistry is its own horror show. Tooth decay, as we discussed, is endemic, and the solution when pain becomes unbearable is extraction. Local barbers or travelling tooth pullers perform this service with pliers or specialised tools, yanking teeth from screaming patients without anaesthesia. The relief when the tooth finally comes out is genuine, the source of pain is gone, but the extraction itself is an ordeal that people delay as long as possible. Mental illness is understood through religious or moral frameworks rather than medical ones. The afflicted are often cared for by families, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Those who can't be managed at home might be confined, restrained, or sent to early institutions that function more as prisons than as hospitals. The treatments available, if you can call them treatments, include restraint, isolation, and in some cases, the same purging and bleeding used for physical ailments. Historians still argue about whether colonial medicine helped or harmed patients on balance. The consensus seems to be that professional medicine often did harm, while folk medicine and basic nursing care, keeping patients warm, hydrated, and comfortable, probably helped. The best advice, if you fell seriously ill in 1776, was probably to hope your body could heal itself while kind women brought you broth and tea. You're feeling better now, or at least no worse. The headache is fading. The stomach has settled. You're going to be fine, probably, as long as nothing more serious comes along. Just don't let them bleed you. There is no moment in a colonial woman's life more dangerous, more consequential, or more shrouded in female community than childbirth. We need to talk about it, and we need to approach it with the solemnity it deserves, because for women in 1776, pregnancy and childbirth are journeys into genuine peril. Let's start with the numbers, because numbers tell the story. A woman who reaches adulthood and marries can expect to be pregnant 5 to 8 times over her childbearing years. Of those pregnancies, some will end in miscarriage, a common occurrence that's mourned but often not recorded. Of the children born alive, perhaps 1 in 5 will die before age 1, from illness, accident, failure to thrive, any of the countless dangers that beset infants in an era without antibiotics or understanding of germs, and the woman herself. Maternal mortality rates in colonial America are estimated at 1 to 2% per birth. That sounds small until you multiply it by 8 pregnancies and realise that a woman faces roughly a 10 to 15% lifetime chance of dying in childbirth. This is not a distant risk. This is a reality that every woman knows that shapes how women approach pregnancy, that explains the wills and spiritual preparations that precede every lying in. When labour begins, the attending woman is not a physician. Physicians are male, and their presence at childbirth is rare and usually disastrous, reserved for emergencies where intervention is the only option. Instead, a midwife attends, often accompanied by other women of the community. This is women's space, women's knowledge, women's support network in action. The midwife has learned her trade through apprenticeship and experience, attending births for years before being trusted to manage them independently. Her knowledge is practical: how to assess the progress of labour, how to position the mother, how to manage complications within the limits of what's possible. She brings herbal remedies for pain and to strengthen contractions. She brings calm authority to a frightening situation. She brings experience that formal medical training can't provide. Labour happens at home, usually in the main room where the fire provides warmth, with the bed or a special birthing chair as the centrepiece. The room is often darkened, windows covered, doors closed, a womb-like space for the emergence of new life. The other women present offer physical support, emotional encouragement, and practical assistance, fetching water, holding the mother's hands, praying. The duration of labour varies enormously as it does today, but women in 1776 don't have epidurals or other pain management options. There's alcohol, which dulls sensation somewhat. There are herbal preparations that may or may not help. There's the support of other women who have been through this themselves. But primarily there's endurance, hour after hour of pain that must simply be survived. Most births, thankfully, proceed normally. The baby comes, the cord is cut, the placenta is delivered. The midwife checks both mother and child. The attendant women offer congratulations, and the hard part seems to be over. But the danger isn't finished. Post-birth infection, what colonial women call childbed fever, kills many women in the days and weeks after delivery. Without understanding of germs or hygiene, without antibiotics, infection that enters through the birth canal spreads through the body and becomes fatal. The mother enters a period called lying in, typically lasting several weeks, during which she's expected to rest and recover, while other women manage her household. This is both medical wisdom, the body needs time to heal, and social custom, a recognition that new mothers need support. Wealthier women might have servants to cover their duties. Poorer women rely on neighbours, relatives, the community of women who understand what's needed. Complications during labour are the real terror. Babies positioned wrong, breech, transverse, with a cord wrapped around them, can die in the birth canal and often take their mothers with them. Prolonged labour exhausts both mother and child. Hemorrhage that can't be controlled means death. The midwife has tools and techniques for some of these situations, turning a baby, managing cord prolapse. But for true emergencies, options are limited. When a physician is called to a difficult birth, it usually means instruments are coming. Forceps to pull a stuck baby free, or worse. Craniotomy, the crushing of a baby's skull to allow extraction when birth is truly impossible, saves mothers' lives at the cost of babies who couldn't have been saved anyway. These are desperate measures for desperate situations, and women who survive such interventions carry physical and emotional scars. Breastfeeding begins immediately and continues for a year or two, sometimes longer. There's no formula, no reliable alternative to mother's milk. Wet nurses exist for wealthy families, or when mothers can't nurse, but most mothers feed their own babies, a task that adds to already overwhelming domestic responsibilities. Nursing is also the primary form of contraception available. It doesn't prevent pregnancy reliably, but it does space birth somewhat, giving bodies time to recover. The emotional dimensions of childbirth in colonial America are complex. Joy at a successful birth, certainly, but also relief at survival, anxiety about the infant's health, awareness that the next pregnancy might not go as well. Women's diaries and letters are full of these mixed emotions: gratitude for children who live, grief for children who die, resignation about the dangers that come with female embodiment. Historians still argue about whether colonial women feared childbirth or accepted it as natural. The answer is probably both, and varies by individual temperament and community culture. Some women approach each birth with terror, others face it with faith and fatalism. Most probably experience a mixture of emotions that defies simple characterization. The midwife leaves after checking that mother and baby are stable. The attendant women return to their own homes and responsibilities, with promises to visit tomorrow and bring food. The new mother lies in her bed, exhausted beyond words, with a new life beside her and a body that has just accomplished something simultaneously ordinary and miraculous. She survived. This time, she survived. Speaking of survival, let's acknowledge the omnipresent reality that shadows colonial life. Disease. We've touched on it already. Childbed fever, childhood mortality, the various ailments that folk medicine tries to address. But we haven't fully reckoned with how constantly and catastrophically illness shapes the 1776 world. Start with smallpox, the Great Terror. This disease kills roughly 30% of those who contract it, and it leaves survivors scarred, sometimes blinded, their faces marked for life with the pockmarks that give the disease its name. Smallpox arrives in waves, sweeping through communities, filling graveyards, devastating families. When it comes to a town that hasn't experienced it recently, the results are catastrophic. The one medical intervention that actually works against smallpox is inoculation, intentionally infecting a person with a mild case to provide future immunity. This technique was introduced to the American colonies in the 1720s, and it works, but it's controversial. Being inoculated means being deliberately infected, spending weeks ill, and running a real risk of death, smaller than catching smallpox naturally, but real nonetheless. Communities debate whether to allow inoculation, when to allow it, how to manage the inoculated so they don't spread disease to others. George Washington will inoculate the Continental Army against smallpox during the Revolution, one of the most significant military medical decisions in history. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Dysentery is almost as deadly and far more common. This catch-all term covers various intestinal infections that cause severe diarrhea, dehydration, and often death. The causes are what you'd expect given colonial sanitation. Contaminated water, contaminated food, contaminated everything, really. Dysentery sweeps through army camps, through cities, through any place where people live in close quarters with inadequate sanitation. Children are especially vulnerable. Dysentery kills more colonial children than almost anything else. Typhoid fever, transmitted through contaminated water and food, is another constant presence. The symptoms, prolonged high fever, delirium, intestinal problems, can last for weeks, and mortality rates are significant. Typhoid Mary is still over a century in the future, but the disease she'll become famous for carrying is already killing colonists regularly. Malaria plagues the southern colonies, carried by mosquitoes that breed in swamps and wetlands. Seasoning, the period when new arrivals get sick as their bodies encounter unfamiliar diseases, is particularly brutal in the south, where malaria, typhoid and dysentery combine to create a deadly gauntlet for newcomers. Survival rates for European immigrants in the colonial Chesapeake region are grimly low. Yellow fever makes periodic appearances, especially in port cities where it arrives with ships from the Caribbean. Yellow fever epidemics can kill thousands in a single season, emptying cities as those who can flee to the countryside while those who can't die in their beds. The mosquito transmission isn't understood. People blame bad air and miasmas, which is incorrect but does lead some to flee low-lying areas where mosquitoes breed, inadvertently reducing their exposure. Influenza sweeps through regularly, more deadly in an era without antivirals or supportive care than it is today. What we'd call the flu can kill the elderly, the young, and those weakened by other conditions, and colonial medicine has no effective response. Tuberculosis, consumption as they call it, is a slow killer, destroying lungs over months or years, causing the wasting and coughing that will become romantic in Victorian novels, but is simply deadly in colonial reality. There's no cure, there's no effective treatment. You get consumption, and you slowly, steadily decline. Here's what's striking about colonial attitudes toward disease. It's accepted as part of life in a way modern people find difficult to comprehend. Illness is expected. Death from illness is expected. You lose siblings in childhood, you lose children in infancy, you lose neighbours and friends to epidemics, and you accept this as the way things are. Prayer helps cope. Faith provides meaning. Community support gets you through. Quarantine exists as a concept and is sometimes implemented, especially for smallpox. Ships arriving from infected ports are held offshore while passengers are monitored. Houses where smallpox is present are marked, their inhabitants isolated. But the mechanisms of disease transmission aren't understood, so quarantine measures are inconsistent and often ineffective. The doctor, if you call one, can do little beyond the bloodletting and purging we discussed. Fever, bloodletting, intestinal trouble, purging, consumption, various ineffective remedies that make patients feel like something is being done even though nothing is. The wise course, usually, is to rest, drink fluids, not water, remember water is suspicious, and hope your body can fight off whatever has invaded it. Hospitals in the modern sense don't exist. There are almshouses for the poor and infirm, and there are pest houses for quarantining those with contagious diseases. But the idea of a clean, well-equipped facility for treating illness is far in the future. If you're sick at home, cared for by family members who are probably exposing themselves to whatever you have. Survival in colonial America requires surviving disease over and over, building immunity through exposure if exposure doesn't kill you first. The hardy constitution that colonists praise in themselves is partly genetic luck and partly survivor bias. Those who couldn't survive the disease environment simply didn't make it, leaving their more resistant descendants to carry on. The autumn air smells clean today, cool and fresh, promising the freeze that will reduce some disease transmission as cold kills the insects and slows the microbes. Winter has its own dangers, but it's a respite from the fevers of summer, a season when death retreats slightly even as cold advances. You're healthy today. Enjoy it while it lasts. Amid all this work and worry, disease and death, colonists find meaning and structure through religion. Church isn't optional. It's the organising institution of colonial community, shaping everything from morality to social status to the rhythm of the week. The Sabbath, Sunday, is the one day when regular work stops, or at least pauses. It's a day of rest mandated by religious law and enforced by community expectation. You rise, you dress in your best clothes, which may be your only clothes, but you brush them off and try to look respectable, and you go to church. The meeting house or church building is often the largest structure in a colonial town, a physical declaration of religion's importance. Inside, the seating reflects social hierarchy. The best pews are owned or rented by the wealthiest families, who sit near the front in visible positions. Poorer families sit toward the back. Servants and enslaved people, if they're allowed in the building at all, occupy designated inferior spaces. Your seat in church tells everyone exactly where you stand in the community order. The service itself is long, multiple hours with a sermon that might last 90 minutes or more. The minister reads scripture, leads prayers, delivers moral instruction with varying degrees of fire depending on his temperament and denomination. You sit on hard wooden benches without padding, and standing, sitting, kneeling mark the progression of the service. Heat is minimal in winter. The meeting house might have a few foot warmers, small metal boxes containing coals that families bring from home, but the building itself is unheated. You sit bundled in your heaviest clothes, watching your breath condense, trying to concentrate on eternal matters while your toes go numb. Denominational variation is significant across the colonies. New England is dominated by Congregationalists, Puritans, with their emphasis on education, moral strictness, and congregational self-governance. The middle colonies are religiously diverse. Quakers in Pennsylvania, Dutch Reformed in New York, various German sects scattered throughout. The southern colonies lean Anglican, Church of England, with a more hierarchical structure and closer ties to English tradition. But regardless of denomination, certain features are common. The minister is a figure of authority, educated when many are not, speaking with the weight of divine sanction. His approval or disapproval matters. It affects your standing in the community, your business relationships, your children's prospects. Getting along with the minister is a practical necessity, as well as a spiritual one. Religious law shapes daily life. Blue laws restrict what can be done on Sundays. No work, no commerce, limited recreation. Sexual morality is strictly regulated. Fornication and adultery bring public punishment. Drunkenness, gambling, blasphemy. These are not just sins but crimes, prosecuted in civil courts where church and state intertwine. The minister visits homes, checking on spiritual health, offering counsel, noting who's behaving well and who's falling short. Church membership often requires a public confession of faith, an examination by church elders, acceptance into a covenant community. Members who sin publicly face church discipline, admonition, suspension from communion, excommunication in extreme cases. Yet within this strict framework, religion provides genuine comfort. The belief that suffering has meaning, that death leads somewhere, that a loving God oversees all. These beliefs sustain people through hardships that would otherwise be unbearable. When a child dies, faith provides a framework for grief. The child is with God now, will be seen again in heaven, is spared the sufferings of this world. Without faith, how would you endure? Prayer punctuates daily life. Grace before meals, family devotions morning and evening, private prayers throughout the day, asking for guidance, giving thanks, seeking strength for the work ahead. The Bible is read aloud, passages memorized, its stories internalized as the framework through which experience is understood. The Great Awakening, a revival movement that swept the colonies in the 1730s and 1740s, has shaken things up somewhat. Its emphasis on personal conversion experience, on emotion in religion, on preaching that moves the heart rather than just the mind. These influences are still felt in 1776. Some churches have split over the new revival style versus the old formal ways. Itinerant preachers still travel the countryside, drawing crowds to outdoor meetings where the emotional temperature runs high. Historians still argue about whether colonial Americans were more or less religious than modern Americans, and measurement is difficult because religion meant different things. Church attendance was near universal, but was that sincere faith or social conformity? The records show both fervent believers and cynical conformists, and the proportions remain debated. What's clear is that religion provided the vocabulary through which colonists understood their world. Events were interpreted through providential lenses. A good harvest meant God's blessing. A disease outbreak meant divine punishment. Political conflicts were framed in terms of religious righteousness. The coming revolution will be argued in religious as well as political terms, ministers preaching that resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. The service ends. You rise from your hard bench, stiff from sitting, cold from the unheated building, spiritually something. Nourished, perhaps. Instructed, certainly. The community files out, exchanging greetings, making plans, the social business of the week conducted in the churchyard before everyone disperses to their homes and their Sunday dinners. Tomorrow the work resumes, but today on the Sabbath you rest. Life isn't all work and worship. Even in the relentless round of labour that defines colonial existence, humans find time for play, for pleasure, for those moments of joy that make the drudgery bearable. Entertainment in 1776 is simpler than what you know, rarer than what you expect, and often inseparable from the necessities of daily life. The tavern which we visited earlier to discuss drinking is also the centre of recreation for many communities. Men gather there in the evenings to drink, certainly, but also to play games, cards, dice, backgammon, billiards in establishments that have tables. They argue politics, share news, tell stories, the same activities that happen in bars today, minus the television in the corner. The tavern is where community happens, where social bonds are formed and maintained, where men escape the confines of home for a few hours of masculine fellowship. Women's recreation is more constrained by duty and expectation. Women gather, but usually around useful activities. Quilting bees, spinning gatherings, communal work that's also social occasion. These gatherings combine productivity with companionship. The work goes faster when shared, and the company makes the work pleasant. Gossip flows, news is exchanged, courtship is observed, and by the end of the day, a quilt has been completed or a pile of thread has been spun. Dancing is popular across classes and regions, though the specific dances and attitudes toward dancing vary. Balls and formal dances are elite affairs, opportunities for display and courtship among the wealthy. Country dances are more democratic, community gatherings where everyone participates, fiddlers playing tunes that colonists brought from Europe and have adapted to American circumstances. The steps are set patterns that everyone knows, learned from childhood, performed with varying degrees of skill and enthusiasm. The church frowns on some entertainments. Dancing is controversial in strict communities, and gambling is widely condemned even while being widely practiced. But colonists navigate these tensions in the time-honoured way of humans everywhere. They do what they want and manage the consequences. Music fills the margins of colonial life. Work songs accompany labour. Lullabies soothe children. Hymns mark religious observance. Fiddles are the most common instruments, portable and versatile, though drums, fifes and various keyboard instruments appear in wealthier households. The songs are a mix, traditional tunes brought from the old country, newly composed American pieces, religious music that everyone knows. People sing together because recorded music doesn't exist. because making music is how music happens. Storytelling is entertainment that requires no equipment and is as old as humanity. Long winter evenings, when darkness falls early and work becomes impossible, are filled with stories, family histories, folk tales, accounts of events real and embellished. A good storyteller is valued, can hold a room's attention for hours, can make the time pass pleasantly when there's no alternative. The stories passed down this way, ghost stories, tales of adventure, moral fables, form a shared cultural repository that won't be written down for generations. Reading provides entertainment for those who can read, which is more colonist than you might expect. Literacy rates vary by region and gender, but a substantial portion of the colonial population can read at least simple texts. The Bible is the most commonly read book, but almanacs are hugely popular. Poor Richard's Almanac and its competitors provide calendars, weather predictions, practical advice, and entertainment in one package. Newspapers exist in the larger cities, circulating news and opinion to readers hungry for information about the wider world. Holidays provide scheduled entertainment throughout the year. Christmas is celebrated in some colonies, but not others. Puritan New England frowns on Christmas observance as insufficiently biblical, while Anglican Virginia embraces it with feasting and gift-giving. Election days, training days for militia, days of Thanksgiving and fasting, these become occasions for community gathering, for festivity within appropriate bounds. Sports and physical games appear, especially among children and young men. Various ball games, wrestling, foot races, shooting competitions, these provide entertainment and also build skills useful for work and warfare. Horse racing is popular among those who have horses, which is mostly the wealthy, though everyone enjoys watching. The contests are social events, opportunities for gambling, despite the official disapproval, for comparing horses and riders, for the excitement that competition provides. Courtship itself is a form of entertainment, the drama of romance playing out according to rules that everyone understands. Young people meet at dances, at church, at community events. They walk together, exchange glances, communicate through a vocabulary of gesture and gift that's as elaborate as any formal code. Chaperones observe but don't prevent. The community supervises without quite controlling. Marriage is too important to leave entirely to the young people involved, but their preferences matter within limits. The theatre exists in larger cities. Though it's controversial, many view playgoing as sinful, an encouragement to loose morals. Yet crowds still attend, eager for the escape that performance provides, the chance to see stories enacted by living actors. Travelling performers bring entertainment to smaller communities, conjurers, acrobats, exhibitions of curiosities. What strikes a modern observer about colonial entertainment is its social nature. Almost all recreation happens with other people, in person, face to face. There's no solo entertainment besides reading, no screen to stare at, no headphones to isolate you from your surroundings. Entertainment is community. Community is entertainment. The pleasure comes as much from the company as from the activity. The evening is growing late now. The fire burns low. The stories wind down, the songs quiet. The games conclude. Tomorrow is a work day, and work waits for no one. But tonight, for these few hours, there was laughter and music and the simple joy of human connection. That's entertainment in 1776, and it's enough. Let's say you need to go somewhere, not just down the road to a neighbour's farm, but somewhere significant. The next town, perhaps, or a city, or to visit relatives 100 miles away. This journey, which modern transportation makes trivial, is in 1776 an undertaking of significant difficulty, danger, and duration. Roads, first of all, are terrible. The word road suggests something paved and maintained, but colonial roads are mostly dirt tracks, worn by repeated travel, subject to weather, and maintained by whoever feels like maintaining them, which is often no one. In dry weather they're dusty and rutted. In wet weather they become muddy bogs that can swallow a wagon wheel to the axle. In winter they're frozen ruts that can break an ankle or a cart with equal indifference. Bridges are scarce, and rivers must often be forded, waded across at shallow points, hoping the water isn't too high or the current too strong. Ferries operate at some crossings, but they're expensive and often crowded, and you might wait hours for your turn. When the rivers are flooded or the ferries aren't running, you simply can't cross, and journeys halt until conditions improve. Travel speed depends on how you're moving. On foot, which is how most poor colonists travel, you might cover 15 to 20 miles in a long day, if the roads are decent and you're not carrying heavy loads. That 100-mile journey to your relatives? A week of walking, sleeping rough, or finding accommodation where you can. On horseback, you can cover more ground, 30, 40 miles a day if you push it, and your horse can handle the pace. But not everyone has a horse. Horses need care and feeding on the road, and horse travel brings its own risks. Falls, lamed horses, thrown shoes. The margin between successful journey and stranded disaster is thin. If you have goods to move, you need a cart or wagon, which slows things down considerably. Carts can only go where roads exist and can handle them. Loaded carts move slowly, perhaps 10 to 15 miles a day on good roads, less on bad ones. The jolting and bouncing can damage cargo. The strain can break axles. The whole enterprise requires constant attention and repair. For longer distances, water travel is often better. Coastal shipping moves goods and people along the Atlantic seaboard, and river travel carries traffic inland. A journey from Boston to Philadelphia, for example, is often faster and easier by ship than by land, though sea travel has its own hazards: storms, shipwreck, delays waiting for favourable winds. Seasickness afflicts many passengers, and conditions aboard ship are crowded and uncomfortable. Accommodation along travel routes varies enormously. Taverns and ordinaries provide meals and lodging for travellers at prices that reflect the primitive conditions: shared beds with strangers, uncertain food, noise and chaos throughout the night. You might share a bed with 1 or 2 or 3 other travellers, men you've never met, whose hygiene and habits are their own business. You might sleep on the floor if the beds are full, or in the stable with the horses if the floor is full. The dangers of travel are real and varied. Bandits and highwaymen operate along isolated roads, robbing travellers who venture out alone or insufficiently armed. Getting lost is easy on roads without signs, through landscapes without landmarks. Weather can turn deadly: cold that kills the unprepared, storms that overwhelm travellers, heat that dehydrates and exhausts. Illness is particularly dangerous on the road, far from home and familiar care. A fever that begins during travel leaves you stranded in unfamiliar territory, dependent on strangers' kindness, facing infection in conditions that make recovery unlikely. The postal service exists, but it's slow and unreliable. Letters travel by post rider along established routes, taking weeks to cover distances that modern email traverses in seconds. A letter from Philadelphia to Boston might take 2 weeks, to the frontier much longer, to England months. Urgent news travels only as fast as the fastest horse, and most news travels much slower. This slowness of communication has profound implications for everything from business to warfare to personal relationships. You make decisions with information that's weeks or months old. Events unfold before you learn about them. The news that arrives today describes a world that may have already changed completely. Historians still argue about exactly how isolated colonial communities were from each other. The evidence suggests significant variation. Coastal cities were well connected by shipping and post routes, while interior settlements might go months without news from the outside world. The colonies in 1776 are simultaneously a unified political entity, sort of, and a collection of distinct communities whose connections are tenuous at best. Travel also moves ideas. The political ferment building toward revolution spreads along travel routes, pamphlets carried by post riders, news shared in taverns, revolutionary sentiment passed from community to community by travellers who've been elsewhere and seen what others are thinking. The coming conflict will be coordinated, to the extent it's coordinated at all, through these same slow channels. Your journey, should you undertake it, would be an adventure in the original sense of that word, uncertain, dangerous, and entering into the unknown that might lead anywhere. You'd pack carefully, say goodbye as if you might not return, because you might not, and set out on roads that promise nothing but difficulty. Most colonists, most of the time, stay close to home. Travel is for necessity, not pleasure. The world beyond your immediate community is distant in ways that have nothing to do with mere miles. If travel is slow, information is slower, and in a world without telephones, television, or internet, the speed of communication shapes everything. News in 1776 moves at the pace of horses and ships, which means it barely moves at all by modern standards. Let's trace how information might reach you, here in your colonial home, on a day in late 1776. something significant has happened. Let's say a battle has been fought, or a major political declaration has been made. The event occurs, someone writes about it. That writing must travel. If you're in a city like Philadelphia or Boston, you might have access to a newspaper. Colonial newspapers are small affairs, typically 4 pages, published weekly, containing news from Europe, months old by the time it arrives, news from other colonies, weeks old, local advertisements, and editorial commentary. The news they report is already history by the time it reaches print, but it's the most systematic news source available. The newspaper is read aloud in taverns and coffee houses, shared among neighbours, passed from hand to hand until the paper falls apart. A single copy might reach dozens of readers, spreading information through the community. If you can't read, you can still hear the news read by someone who can. Literacy is not required for news access, but most colonists don't have newspaper access. They rely on word of mouth, on travellers' tales, on letters from distant relatives and friends. A merchant arriving from Boston carries news from that city. A traveller passing through shares what he's heard along the road. A letter from a cousin in Philadelphia provides information about events there. News travels through human networks, accumulating embellishments and distortions along the way, arriving at your ears as a mixture of fact and rumour that's impossible to sort. Official proclamations reach communities through designated channels. Post riders carry government communications. Ministers read announcements from pulpits. Town criers share news in market squares. But even official news is old by the time it arrives, and its interpretation depends on who's doing the reading and what perspective they bring. The colonial post system, established decades before your current moment, provides infrastructure for communication, but operates on timelines that would drive modern people to madness. Post riders travel designated routes on regular schedules, carrying mail bags from post office to post office. At each stop, mail is sorted. Letters continuing along the route stay in the bag. Letters for local delivery are removed for pickup. Sending a letter requires access to the postal system, not everyone has it, ability to pay postage, not cheap, and willingness to wait weeks or months for a reply. Letters are often marked with the expectation of slow response. I hope this finds you well and that you will write when you are able. The assumption is that communication takes time, that responses will come eventually if at all, that patience is required for all correspondence. Private carriers sometimes bypass the postal system, offering faster delivery for a price. Merchants, especially, often use private carriers to move important business communications, but even private carriers are limited by the speed of horses and the condition of roads. For communication across the Atlantic, add months. A letter to England goes by ship, taking weeks to cross the ocean, then must reach its recipient through England's postal system. A reply reverses the journey. 3 to 6 months might pass between sending a letter and receiving an answer, assuming both letters arrive safely, which they don't always do. Ships sink, mail is lost, and some letters simply vanish into the maritime void. This communication reality has profound implications for the political situation of 1776. The colonies are technically governed from London, but London is 3,000 miles and several months away. Decisions made in Parliament reflect colonial situations that have already changed by the time the decisions arrive. Instructions sent to colonial governors describe policies that events have already overtaken. The gap between imperial intention and colonial reality yawns wide, a function of distance and time that no amount of political will can bridge. Rumours fill the information void that official news leaves empty. In the absence of reliable information, people speculate, imagine, fear. A battle might have been fought, or might not. You've heard both versions. The Congress might have decided something important, or the report might be wrong. You live in a world of uncertain information, where truth and falsehood are often indistinguishable, where the only certainty is uncertainty. Historians still argue about how well-informed colonial Americans actually were. Some evidence suggests surprising awareness of distant events. Other evidence suggests profound isolation and ignorance. The reality probably varied enormously by location, social class, and individual circumstance. The coming revolution will be, in part, a communication revolution. Committees of correspondence linking colonial leaders, pamphlets spreading ideas across communities, newspapers amplifying revolutionary sentiment. The infrastructure of communication, slow and imperfect as it is, will be mobilized for political purposes in ways that shape the conflict. But all of that lies ahead. For now, you sit in your small home, in your small community, with limited information about a world that's changing faster than news can travel. You know what your neighbours tell you. You know what the minister reads from the pulpit. You know what travellers report and what rumours suggest. Beyond that, the world is mostly mystery. Let's talk about something that shapes your daily life in ways both obvious and subtle. Class. Colonial America likes to think of itself as more equal than the Old World, a place where birth matters less and achievement matters more. There's some truth to this. Opportunities for advancement exist that wouldn't exist in Europe, but colonial society is still stratified, still hierarchical, still ordered by distinctions of rank that everyone understands and few openly challenge. Your clothing broadcasts your class, the fabrics, the cut, the quality of construction. These tell observers where you stand before you speak a word. The wealthy wear fine imported cloth, silk, linen, well-woven wool in fashionable colours. The middling sort wear respectable but plainer fabrics, sturdy wool, locally woven linen, serviceable rather than fashionable. The poor wear whatever they can get, patched and mended garments, rough cloth, hand-me-downs from those above them in the social order. Some colonies have sumptuary laws, regulations about who can wear what, though these are less common than in Europe and often ignored. The principle behind them remains. Certain materials and styles are for certain people, and dressing above your station is presumptuous, offensive, a violation of the natural order. Your seat in church, remember, reflects your social position. The best pews closest to the pulpit belong to the leading families, bought or rented, markers of status displayed weekly for all to see. Behind them sit the respectable middling families, farmers of substance, successful tradesmen, the backbone of the community. Further back are the poorer members, the servants, those whose status doesn't warrant prominent placement. This seating chart of salvation makes hierarchy visible and reinforces it through repetition. Property ownership is the foundation of social standing, at least for men. Owning land, not just working it, but holding title to it, marks you as a person of substance, a stakeholder in the community, potentially a voter and holder of local office. Landless labourers, tenants, servants. These are lower orders, respected less, empowered less, expected to defer to their betters in social and political matters. The franchise, the right to vote, is tied to property ownership in most colonies. The theory is that only property owners have sufficient stake in society to vote responsibly. The landless might vote for whoever promises them the most, destabilising the political order. This means that many adult men and all adult women cannot vote. Democracy in 1776 is democracy for the propertied, which is a minority of the population. Deference is the social lubricant that makes hierarchy function smoothly. Those below defer to those above. Tipping hats, stepping aside on roads, using titles like Mr. and Esquire that acknowledge superior status. The gentry expect deference and are offended when it's not forthcoming. The lower orders provide deference and are punished when they fail to do so. Yet social mobility exists in ways that distinguish the colonies from the Old World. A poor man can become a prosperous farmer if he works hard, acquires land, and catches some breaks. An indentured servant can complete his term and establish himself independently. The boundaries between classes are permeable in ways that European class boundaries are not, and the American mythology of self-making has roots in this colonial reality, even though the reality is more complicated than the mythology suggests. For women, class operates somewhat differently. A woman's class derives largely from her father's or husband's status. She rises or falls with the men to whom she's attached. A wealthy man's daughter is a woman of standing. A poor woman who marries well rises to her husband's station. Independent female achievement outside of marriage is rare, and often viewed with suspicion. Enslaved people, of course, exist outside this class system entirely, or rather, beneath it. They have no class status because they have no legal personhood. They are property. Their position fixed not by achievement or deference, but by the brutal reality of bondage. We'll discuss this more fully in the next section. Among free colonists, the middle ranks are expanding. The traditional English society divided between gentry and peasants doesn't quite translate to America, where widespread land ownership creates a large class of independent farmers who are neither wealthy nor destitute. These middling sort colonists, farmers, artisans, small merchants, form the bulk of colonial society and increasingly assert their importance. Historians still argue about how rigid or fluid colonial class structure actually was. The evidence suggests both significant barriers to advancement, but also real examples of men who rose from humble origins to prosperity. The promise of America, that hard work can overcome birth, has colonial roots, even though the promise was always only partially true. The class distinctions that seem natural to colonists would be questioned more sharply in coming decades. The revolutionary rhetoric of equality, all men are created equal, will cut against the logic of inherited status, opening questions that will take centuries to fully address. But in 1776, class is simply how society works, as natural as the seasons, as accepted as the sunrise. You know your place. Everyone knows their place. The hierarchy is visible in every interaction, reinforced by every encounter, challenged only at the margins by those bold or desperate enough to push against their station. This is the world. Unequal, stratified, ordered by distinctions you didn't choose but can't escape. Now we must address the brutal reality at the heart of colonial America, the institution that contradicts every claim of liberty and equality, the original sin that will poison the nation for centuries, slavery. In 1776, hundreds of thousands of people in the American colonies are held in bondage, enslaved, owned, bought and sold like livestock, their labour extracted under conditions of violence and deprivation that defy any claim to civilization. Slavery in 1776 is not confined to the South, though the southern colonies have the largest enslaved populations. Enslaved people work in every colony, in New England homes as domestic servants, in mid-Atlantic cities as craftsmen's assistants, in southern fields as agricultural labourers. The economy of colonial America, in all its regions, is built on stolen labour, and the wealth that enables colonists to pursue liberty is often generated by people who have none. The conditions of slavery vary by region and circumstance, but are uniformly degrading. Enslaved people in the Chesapeake and Low Country South work in agricultural operations, tobacco, rice, indigo, that demand brutal labour in difficult conditions. The work is from sunrise to sunset, enforced by violence, with little regard for health or exhaustion. Overseers carry whips. Punishments for perceived infractions include beating, branding, mutilation. The system maintains itself through terror. Enslaved people live in quarters separated from their enslavers, small cabins or barracks that house multiple people in crowded conditions. Food is rationed, clothing is minimal, medical care is non-existent. Families are separated at the whim of owners, children sold away from mothers, husbands from wives, communities scattered by the slave trade. The emotional devastation of this family destruction is incalculable, a wound that never heals. In northern colonies, slavery takes different forms but remains slavery. Enslaved people work as domestic servants in wealthy homes, as skilled workers in craft shops, as labourers in various industries. They might live in closer proximity to their enslavers, might even be treated with something resembling kindness by owners who pride themselves on their humanity. But they're still property. They still can't leave. Their labour still belongs to someone else. The law defines enslaved people as chattel, property, not persons. They can be bought, sold, inherited, mortgaged. They have no legal rights, cannot marry legally, cannot own property, cannot testify against white people in court, cannot move freely. Any children born to enslaved women are automatically enslaved themselves, their status determined at birth regardless of the father's condition. Resistance is constant and takes many forms. Some enslaved people run away, seeking freedom in northern colonies, in Spanish Florida, in maroon communities in remote areas. Some resist through work slowdowns, feigned illness, sabotage. Some resist by maintaining cultural practices, religious traditions, family bonds despite every attempt to destroy them. And some resist through violence, uprising, rebellion, the desperate strike against impossible odds. Slaveholders live in constant fear of rebellion, and this fear shapes colonial law and culture. Slave codes restrict enslaved people's movements, assembly, and access to weapons. Punishments for resistance are severe, designed to terrorize the enslaved population into submission. The violence that maintains slavery is not incidental. It's structural, essential, the foundation on which the whole system rests. The moral contradictions of slavery are not lost on colonial observers, even those who profit from it. How can colonists claim liberty while denying it to others? How can they declare all men created equal while holding men in bondage? These questions are asked in 1776 and they have no satisfying answers. Some colonists genuinely oppose slavery and work for its abolition. Others acknowledge its evil while continuing to participate. Most simply accept it as the way things are, natural and inevitable despite its obvious brutality. The enslaved themselves leave fewer historical records. They were mostly denied literacy, and their perspectives weren't recorded by those who wrote official histories. But the records that do exist, the accounts that have survived, reveal people of full humanity. Loving parents, skilled workers, creative resistors, religious believers, complete human beings reduced by law to property, but never reducible in reality. Historians have worked for decades to recover the experiences of enslaved people, to centre their perspectives in the telling of American history, to acknowledge that the building of America was their work as much as anyone's, more than anyone's in many cases, since they did the work while receiving nothing in return. The coming revolution will not end slavery. The Declaration of Independence will declare all men created equal, while its author holds hundreds of people in bondage. The Constitution will count enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation while denying them any representation at all. The contradiction will fester for nearly a century before civil war finally ends the institution, and its legacies will poison American society for centuries more. In 1776, though, slavery is simply present. The backdrop against which liberty is discussed, the foundation on which prosperity is built, the moral catastrophe that everyone sees and almost no one addresses adequately. Enslaved people wake this morning to labour they didn't choose, under conditions they didn't accept, building a nation that will not acknowledge their humanity. This is colonial America. All of it. The whole picture, the liberty and the bondage inseparable. The year is 1776 and something is shifting. You feel it in the air, hear it in the tavern conversations, sense it in the tension that crackles through your community. The political temperature is rising. The words that were whispered are now spoken aloud. The conflict that has been building for years is approaching a crisis. Let's set the scene. For over a decade, the relationship between the American colonies and Britain has been deteriorating. Taxes imposed without colonial representation, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, have provoked outrage. Boycotts of British goods have been organised. Violence has flared. The Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, clashes between colonists and soldiers. The colonies have formed committees of correspondence to coordinate resistance. A Continental Congress has met, debated, and begun to function as an alternative government. And now, in this autumn of 1776, the situation has moved beyond protest to open warfare. The Declaration of Independence was proclaimed in July, announcing to the world that the colonies consider themselves free. British troops occupy New York. The Continental Army, such as it is, struggles to survive against the most powerful military on Earth. The outcome is uncertain, and the cost of failure would be catastrophic. This political crisis seeps into everyday life in ways both dramatic and subtle. In your community, people who are neighbours are now divided by loyalty. Patriots support independence. Loyalists remain faithful to the crown. Some families are split, brother against brother, the intimate bonds of community torn by political allegiance. Choosing a side is unavoidable, and the wrong choice could cost you everything. The local militia musters more frequently now. Men who should be harvesting crops or tending shops are drilling instead, learning to be soldiers in an army that lacks training, supplies, and certainty of purpose. Some have already marched off to join Washington's forces. Some have died in battles whose names will become famous. The women left behind manage farms and businesses alone, adding military uncertainty to the already crushing burden of daily labour. Economic disruption accompanies political turmoil. Trade with Britain, which supported colonial prosperity, has been severed by boycott and then by war. Goods that were imported are now unavailable or ruinously expensive. Money itself is problematic. The Continental Congress prints currency that loses value rapidly, and nobody knows what anything is really worth. Prices rise, supplies shrink, and the material conditions of life worsen even as the ideological stakes climb. Fear is everywhere. Fear of British victory, which might bring harsh punishment for rebellion. Fear of war's chaos, of armies passing through, of violence that might touch anyone regardless of politics. fear of neighbours who might be informers, of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person, of being denounced as a traitor to one side or the other. The political is personal in ways that make every interaction fraught, yet hope is everywhere too. The rhetoric of liberty, of rights, of self-governance, it resonates with people who have always resented distant authority, who have built lives through their own labour, who believe they deserve to govern themselves. The Declaration's grand phrases, all men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, speak to aspirations that colonists carry deep in their hearts, even if the application of those phrases remains deeply imperfect. The minister in his Sunday sermon interprets events through religious lenses. Is American liberty God's will? Are British oppressors agents of divine punishment? The religious vocabulary that provides meaning for everyday life now provides meaning for political crisis too. The revolution is not just a political conflict, it's a moral and spiritual drama in which eternal stakes are being played out. Pamphlets circulate, arguing positions with passion and eloquence. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published earlier this year, has been read by hundreds of thousands, its arguments for independence spreading through the colonies like fire. The pamphlet wars create a kind of public debate, a contest of ideas fought in printed pages that reach ordinary people who've never participated in politics before. The outcome is uncertain. That's the thing to remember, the thing that's hard to feel when you know how the story ends. In late 1776, American independence looks like a long shot at best. The British have the better army, the better navy, more resources, more experience. They've defeated the Continental Army repeatedly. Washington's forces are dwindling, winter is coming, and with it the suffering that will test every soldier's commitment. This might all fail. The revolution might be crushed, its leaders hanged as traitors, its supporters punished, and the colonies returned to their former status under much harsher conditions. That possibility feels real because it is real, and it colours every decision, every conversation, every sleepless night. You don't know you're living through a turning point in history. You're just living through it, one uncertain day at a time, hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, trying to survive whatever comes. The fires of revolution burn hot, and nobody knows yet whether they'll forge a nation or consume everyone they touch. The light is fading now. The sun, which rose on your labours this morning, is sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that you'd admire if you weren't so tired. The day's work is winding down, not finished, never truly finished, but slowing to the pace that evening demands. Night comes early in late autumn, the darkness arriving by late afternoon, claiming hours that summer would fill with work. You've already fed the animals their evening meal, already hauled the last water of the day, already secured the outbuildings against whatever might prowl in the darkness. The fire is built up for evening, casting its warm glow across the room where the whole day's living has happened. Supper is simple. What's supper ever been but simple? The remains of dinner warmed and stretched to feed the family one more time. You eat by firelight, the flames dancing on faces you know as well as your own, the faces of people you'll sleep beside tonight, work beside tomorrow, live beside until death parts you or distance separates you. The evening is for small tasks that don't require much light, mending by feel, conversations that need no illumination, prayers spoken into the darkness. The children are drowsy, their high energy of morning reduced to a quiet sleepiness that will soon become actual sleep. You watch them nodding by the fire, these small people who represent everything you work for, everything you worry about, everything you hope for in a future you won't live to see. Someone tells a story. It might be a tale from the old country, handed down through generations until its origins are lost. It might be a local legend, something that happened to someone's grandfather, or maybe never happened to anyone but grew in the telling anyway. The story fills the evening air, its words weaving patterns in the firelit darkness, and for these few minutes, the weight of tomorrow lifts. Outside, the world is settling into night. The stars emerge. So many stars, more than modern eyes ever see through the light pollution of cities, wheeling overhead in the ancient patterns that have guided humans since before memory. The moon rises, if there is a moon, casting silver light across a landscape empty of artificial illumination. The darkness is complete, in a way that modern people, surrounded always by screens and streetlights, can barely imagine. The sounds of night are different from the sounds of day. Owls calling, distant dogs barking, the rustle of creatures you can't see moving through the darkness. Inside, the fire crackles and pops, and the house makes its settling noises, and somewhere a child breathes in the steady rhythm of sleep. You're tired. The kind of tired that comes from physical labour repeated day after day, from responsibilities that never rest, from a life lived at the mercy of weather and fortune. Your body aches in places that have ached for years, familiar pains that are simply part of existing in a world where everything must be done by human power. But there's peace in this moment too. The day is done, the family is safe, the fire is warm, tomorrow will bring its own labours, its own worries, but tomorrow is not yet here, and tonight, for these few quiet hours, you can simply rest. The candles, if you've lit any, burn down, the fire settles into embers. One by one, the family moves toward bed, toward that lumpy straw mattress and those scratchy wool blankets, and the shared warmth of bodies pressed together against the cold. You'll sleep the segmented sleep of your ancestors, waking perhaps in the dark watches, lying quietly until drowsiness returns. And so the evening deepens, the darkness soft now, almost welcoming, the way darkness becomes when you surrender to it rather than fighting it. The fire glows amber and rust, its heat radiating outward in gentle waves that wrap around you like a worn quilt. Your eyelids grow heavy. The sounds of the night become distant, muffled, as if heard through water or through the walls of a dream. The world of 1776 settles around you, imperfect, difficult, full of hardship you wouldn't choose but somehow manage. The chamber pot in the corner, the bedbugs in the mattress, the corn mush for breakfast, the endless labour that begins again with the rooster's crow. These are the texture of your life, and you know them the way you know your own hands. Sleep comes now, rising like a tide, and you let it take you. The fire will burn down. The darkness will deepen. Somewhere far away, history is being made, battles fought, declarations signed, a nation struggling to be born. But here, in this small home, in this quiet moment, there is only rest. The stars turn overhead, the same stars that have watched over every human night since the first humans looked up and wondered. Tomorrow will come. Tomorrow always comes. But for now, let your breath slow. Let your thoughts drift. Let the soft darkness hold you. Rest now, rest well. The morning will bring its own mercies. The year is 1776 and you are home.